Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. We were camping at Wheatfields Lake, way out in Arizona. Not the main campground, that place is a zoo on holiday weekends, packed with RVs and generators and kids with sparklers. My cousins had the idea to go to the east side of the lake, which is supposed to be more primitive, more secluded, just a dirt track leading to a few cleared spots near the water. We wanted quiet. We got anything but. It was me, my girlfriend Sarah, and our little boy, Leo. He's 3. Then there were my 2 cousins, Mark and his wife Jen, and their 2 kids, who were a bit older, like 8 and 10. We got there Friday afternoon. The drive-in was already kind of rough, just this dusty, rutted road that made the car sway and jolt. The trees were thick once we got away from the main area, mostly pines and some scrub oak, and the air smelled like hot dust and pine needles. The lake itself was beautiful though, really still. Dark water, with the sun starting to go down and painting the sky in oranges and purples. We found a good spot, not right on the water, but maybe 50 yards back, under a canopy of tall pines. It felt private. A little too private, maybe, but at the time it just felt peaceful. We set up 2 big tents, one for me, Sarah, and Leo, and another for my cousins and their kids. We got a fire going as the sun dipped away, cooked some burgers and hot dogs, the usual camping stuff. The kids were running around with glow sticks, and it was all just normal, perfect even. The first night, Friday night, was dead quiet. I remember lying in the tent, listening to the absolute silence. No traffic, no people, just the occasional rustle of some small animal in the leaves, and the faint sound of the water lapping at the shore. I slept like a rock. Saturday we spent the day swimming and fishing. The kids had a blast. Leo was toddling around at the water's edge, throwing rocks in. It was hot, but the lake was cool. We saw a few boats way out in the middle of the lake, but no one else came over to our side. It felt like we had the whole east shore to ourselves. As it got dark, we built another fire, made s'mores. The kids were tired and grubby and happy. We got them all into their sleeping bags around 10 o'clock. The adults stayed up for a bit longer, just talking softly by the dying embers of the fire. The sky was insane out there, so many stars, no city lights to wash them out. We saw a few satellites moving and tons of shooting stars. It was one of those nights that makes you feel small, but in a good way. We finally turned in around midnight. Our tent was a good-sized family tent with a little screened-in vestibule area. Sarah and I were on one air mattress, and Leo was in a little kid's sleeping bag right next to us on a foam pad. He fell asleep almost instantly. I remember lying there, feeling the day's tiredness in my muscles, listening to Sarah's breathing even out, and just feeling content. The air was cool, and I could smell the lingering smoke from our fire on my clothes. I drifted off pretty quickly. What woke me up was Leo. He started fussing a little, not a full cry, just this restless squirming and whining. I looked at my watch. The glow in the dark hands showed it was a little after 4 in the morning. Sarah stirred next to me. "What's wrong, baby?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "I think he's just disoriented," I whispered. "Maybe cold." I sat up in the dark. The inside of the tent was pitch black, just the faintest outline of the mesh windows. I fumbled for my headlamp but didn't turn it on, not wanting to wake him up fully. I reached over and felt his forehead. It was cool. I pulled his sleeping bag up a little higher and tucked it around him. He settled down almost immediately, his breathing getting deep and regular again. Sarah had already fallen back asleep. I lay back down, but I was awake now, just staring up at the dark ceiling of the tent, listening. That's when I heard it. It didn't start loud. It was this low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. At first I thought it was a truck, a really big one, a semi maybe, gearing down on some far-off highway. But we were miles from any real road. The sound just grew, and it changed. It wasn't a rumble anymore, it was a roar. I've heard bears on TV, I've heard lions at the zoo. This was nothing like that. This was deeper, lower. It was a vibration more than a sound, a bass note that hit you in the chest before it even registered in your ears. It felt ancient. It rolled across the lake, and I could feel it through the ground. The air in the tent felt thick with it. I was frozen, just completely rigid. My heart was suddenly hammering against my ribs, so hard I thought it would wake Sarah up. The roar went on and on. I counted in my head, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. It lasted a solid 10 seconds, maybe 12. It was a long, sustained, guttural blast of sound, and then it stopped. The silence was almost as heavy as the sound had been. I held my breath. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, and then from the other side of the lake came the frantic, high-pitched barking of a dog. It wasn't a normal bark. It was pure panic, a yelping, scared sound. Then another dog joined in, and another. It sounded like every dog for a mile had just been jolted awake and was screaming its head off. I looked over at Sarah. Her eyes were wide open, reflecting the tiny bit of ambient light. She was staring at me, and I could see the same raw fear I felt. We didn't say a word. We didn't have to. Our look said everything. What the hell was that? Then the second roar came. It was the same, but somehow worse because now we knew what it was. That deep, low, guttural blast. It wasn't an angry sound, not exactly. It was a declaration, a statement of sheer, massive size. It was the sound of something that had no reason to be afraid of anything. It rolled across the water, and I felt a cold sweat break out all over my body. My scalp was prickling. I had chills running down my spine, like someone had dripped ice water down my back. Leo stirred in his sleep, but didn't wake up. Thank God. The roar stopped again, more frantic barking from across the lake, then a third one. This one seemed a tiny bit closer, or maybe I was just imagining it. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. A bear? No way. A moose? I don't think they have those in Arizona. A dinosaur? My brain, in its panic, actually went there for a second. It was that primal, that wrong. I slowly, carefully pushed myself up on my elbows. I was terrified to make any noise, any movement that might draw attention to our tent. The fabric of the tent walls suddenly felt as thin as tissue paper. We were just a nylon bubble in the dark woods. The fourth roar came, and then a fifth. Each one was the same sustained, powerful blast. Each one made my stomach clench. The dog barks were getting more and more hysterical. I could picture them, straining at their chains, trying to get away from that sound. After the fifth one, there was a pause. A longer one this time, maybe a minute or two. The barking died down a little, turning into sporadic, worried yips. I dared to hope it was over, that whatever it was had moved on. Sarah reached out in the dark and found my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. We just held on, listening so hard it hurt. Then the sixth roar came. This one was different. It was louder, sharper. It didn't roll. It cracked through the night. It was so loud it felt like it was right outside the tent. I actually flinched, pulling my shoulders up. I swear I felt the ground shake. This one was shorter, maybe only 7 or 8 seconds, but it was intense, like a final, powerful warning. And then, as it faded, the sound did something I'll never forget. It seemed to pull away. It was like the source of the sound was moving fast, through the trees on the west side of the lake. The volume dropped quickly, like something huge was loping away into the distance, and the roar trailed off with it, getting fainter and fainter, until it was just swallowed by the forest. Then, nothing. Just the occasional last, confused bark, from across the lake. The silence was absolute, and it was terrifying. Before, the silence was peaceful. Now it was a void that something monstrous had just left. It felt watchful. I don't know how long we lay there, not moving, not speaking. It could have been 5 minutes, it could have been half an hour. My body was still buzzing with adrenaline, every tiny sound, the rustle of a leaf, the creak of a tree branch, made me jump. I was convinced I could hear footsteps, heavy, slow footsteps just outside the tent. I was straining my ears, trying to pass every noise, my imagination painting pictures of a huge, dark shape moving between the trees. I must have drifted off at some point, because the next thing I knew, grey light was filtering through the tent fabric. It was morning. I sat up immediately, my heart still going too fast. Sarah was awake too, just staring at the ceiling. "Did that really happen?" she whispered. I just nodded. We got up slowly, moving like we were in a daze. We unzipped the tent flap and stepped out into the cool morning air. Everything looked the same. The fire pit was a circle of cold ash. The trees were still. The lake was like glass. It was so normal it felt like a slap in the face. My cousins were already up, moving around their tent. Mark was pumping water through a filter. He looked over and smiled. "Morning. Sleep okay?" I just stared at him. "You didn't hear anything last night?" He frowned. "Hear what? Jen snores, but that's about it." He laughed. My blood ran cold. They were maybe 30 feet away. Their kids had been quiet all night. How could they not have heard it? Those roars were the loudest things I have ever heard in my life. They should have shaken the ground. They should have woken the dead. Didn't push it. I just said nothing. Just thought I heard something. We went about the morning routine, making coffee, cooking oatmeal for the kids. But the feeling was gone. The peace was gone. The whole area felt charged, like the air was still vibrating from those sounds. I kept looking over at the west side of the lake, at the dense, shadowy tree line. It looked different now. It didn't look like trees and rocks anymore. It looked like a hiding place. We packed up and left that day. We were supposed to stay until Sunday afternoon. But nobody argued when I suggested we head out early. We just threw everything in the cars as fast as we could. The kids were confused, but we just said we were tired. As we were driving away, bouncing down that dirt road, I took one last look in the rearview mirror at the lake. The sun was high now, sparkling on the water. It looked so innocent, but I knew what was in those woods. Or I don't know what was in those woods. That's the thing. I have no idea what made that sound. I just know that it was real. It was huge, and it knew we were there. And the worst part is the not knowing. The sound is burned into my brain. I hear it sometimes when I'm trying to fall asleep now, that low, rolling, chest-rattling roar coming out of the Arizona darkness. And I remember how small and fragile we were, just a little flicker of light in a very, very big and very, very dark woods. I'll never go back there ever. Story 2. Okay, so I've never really talked about this in detail before, but it's one of those things that stuck with me my whole life. I was 6 years old back in 1957, living in Valentine, Nebraska. It was one of those hot summer days where the air feels thick and heavy, and you just want to be outside until the sun goes down. I was playing hide and seek with a bunch of neighborhood kids. There must have been 5 or 6 of us, all around the same age. We didn't have a lot of toys or anything fancy, so we made our own fun, running around between houses and down alleys. That day, I remember the game had been going on for what felt like hours. The sun was starting to dip a little, casting long shadows, but it was still bright enough to see everything clearly. I was hiding with another girl. I don't remember her name, just that she was one of the quieter kids, with blonde hair tied back in a ponytail. We ducked into this narrow alley between 2 houses on our street. It wasn't anything special, just a dirt path with tall wooden fences on either side and a few trash cans scattered around. The ground was dry and cracked from the heat, and you could smell that dusty, earthy scent mixed with the faint odor of garbage. We were crouched behind one of the bigger trash cans, trying to stay quiet and out of sight. I remember the rough texture of the wood against my back and how my knees were starting to ache from squatting for so long. The other girl was pressed up close to me, and I could feel her shoulder shaking a little, probably from trying not to laugh or make noise. We were both listening for the sounds of the seeker getting closer, but everything was mostly quiet, just the distant hum of a car engine somewhere and the occasional bird chirping. Then, out of nowhere, I saw movement at the far end of the alley. At first I thought it was one of the other kids trying to sneak up on us, but as it got closer, I realized it was way too big. This thing was huge, taller than any man I'd ever seen, and it was covered in dark, matted hair from head to toe. It walked upright like a person, but its build was all wrong, like an ape or something, with broad shoulders and long arms that swung slightly as it moved. The way it stepped was heavy and deliberate, each footfall making a soft thud on the dirt that I could feel vibrating through the ground. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I froze completely, unable to move or even breathe properly. The other girl must have seen it too, because I felt her grip tighten on my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. We were both staring, and I remember thinking that it couldn't be real. Maybe it was a costume or a trick of the light. But the more I looked, the more I knew it wasn't. The hair wasn't fake, it was thick and messy, almost like fur, and it moved with the creature's body in a way that looked too natural. Its face was shadowed, but I could make out a bulky shape, and it didn't have any features that looked human. Then it made this noise, a deep, harsh sound that seemed to come from its chest. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before, not a growl or a roar, but something raw and guttural, like rocks grinding together. The sound echoed off the buildings around us, making it feel like it was coming from all directions at once. It was so loud that it vibrated in my ears, and I could feel it in my bones, this low rumble that made the hair on my arms stand up. For a few seconds, we just stayed there, paralyzed. I think my brain was trying to process what I was seeing, but it didn't make any sense. This thing was real, and it was getting closer, maybe 20 feet away now. I could see the way its muscles shifted under that dark hair, and how its eyes, if it had eyes, seemed to be fixed on us. The air around us felt colder suddenly, like a chill had swept through the alley, and I started shivering even though it was still warm out. Then, all at once, the fear kicked in. I don't know who moved first, but we both scrambled to our feet and started running. My legs felt weak and shaky, like they weren't connected to my body, but adrenaline took over. I didn't look back, but I could hear those heavy footsteps behind us, along with that awful noise. It was following us, and it was fast. The sounds were getting louder, echoing between the fences and houses, so it felt like the thing was right on our heels. I remember the alley seemed to stretch on forever, even though it was probably only 50 feet long. My lungs were burning, and I could taste dirt and panic in my mouth. The other girl was ahead of me, her ponytail flying as she ran, and I focused on that, just trying to keep up. We burst out into the street, and the sunlight felt blinding after the dimness of the alley. I stumbled on the curb, scraping my knee on the pavement, but I didn't stop. I just kept running, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. We didn't stop until we reached my front yard, where a couple of the other kids were standing around looking confused. I collapsed on the grass, gasping for air, and the other girl did the same. She was crying quietly, and I realized I was too. Tears were streaming down my face, and I was trembling all over. My knee was stinging where I'd scraped it, and there was a little blood, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was that thing in the alley and the sound it made. One of the older kids asked what happened, but we couldn't get the words out properly. I just kept shaking my head, and the other girl was sobbing too hard to speak. After a minute, I managed to stammer something about a big animal or a monster, but nobody believed us. They thought we were making it up to get out of the game, or that we'd seen a dog or something. but I knew what I saw. It wasn't an animal I'd ever seen before, and it wasn't a person in a costume. The way it moved was too fluid, too powerful, and that sound, it was like nothing I'd ever heard, and it stuck in my head for days afterward. The rest of that day is a blur. I remember going inside, and my mum cleaned up my knee and asked what happened. I tried to tell her, but she just said I must have imagined it or seen a shadow. I didn't push it because I was too scared, and part of me wondered if I had imagined it, but the fear was real. It settled deep in my chest, this cold, heavy feeling that didn't go away for a long time. That night I had trouble sleeping, and every little noise outside made me jump. I kept replaying the moment in my head over and over, and each time the details felt more vivid, not less. Even now, decades later, I can close my eyes and see it perfectly. The way the light hit its dark fur, the sound echoing, the sheer size of it. And years after that, when I was in high school, I heard from a teacher who lived on our street that she'd heard strange sounds around that time too. Deep noises at night that she couldn't explain. She mentioned it in passing, and it sent a chill down my spine because it confirmed that I wasn't crazy. But that day, in that alley, it was just me and that other girl, and this thing that shouldn't exist, and the terror that's never really left me. I still don't know what it was, and I probably never will. But some days, when I'm out walking and the shadows get long, I find myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see it again. Story 3. I've never been one to put much stock in the old stories. You know the ones. The tales the elders tell around the fire when the sun goes down. Stories about things that live deep in the woods, things that walk on two legs, but aren't men. I always figured they were just that. Stories, meant to keep kids from wandering too far, or to explain a bad hunt or a harsh winter. I was wrong. I know that now. What happened to us? What's still happening? It's made a believer out of me. And I'm scared. I'm more scared now than I've ever been in my life. It was early fall, maybe a moon or so before the leaves would really start to turn. The air had that crisp edge to it, the kind that makes you pull your hide cloak a little tighter in the morning. I remember the day started like any other. The sun was just a pale glow behind the thick grey clouds that always seemed to hang over the river this time of year. I woke up cold, the way you do when the warmth of the fire has died down to embers. My breath plumed in the air inside my lodge. I could hear the river, a constant low rush that's the sound of home. We're a fishing people. The river is our life. It feeds us, it waters us, it's everything. That morning, my job was to check the nets. We set them in a deep, slow-moving channel not far from the village. It was my turn, so I pulled on my moccasins, grabbed my walking stick and headed out. The ground was soft and damp from the night's dew, and the forest was quiet, the way it is just before the world properly wakes up. It should have been peaceful. It usually was. But that morning, there was a feeling in the air. A kind of heavy silence, not the good kind, the kind that feels like you're being watched. I shook it off, told myself I was just spooked from the talk around the fire the night before. See, the nets had been troubled for over a week. It started small, a few fish missing. Not a big deal. Sometimes an otter gets lucky, or the current shifts and a few slip out. But then it kept happening. Every morning more fish were gone. Not just gone, but the nets were torn. Not chewed through, not snapped by a struggling animal. They were ripped. Big, ragged holes, like something huge and strong had just shoved its way through. And the fish that were left were often smashed, bruised and broken, as if they'd been crushed in a giant fist. And then there was the smell. I caught the first hint of it about halfway to the nets. It was faint at first, just a foulness on the air, like old meat left in the sun, mixed with something else, something musky and wild, like a wet dog but 1,000 times worse. My nose wrinkled. I stopped walking, listening. Nothing. Just the river and the drip of water from the cedars. I kept going, my grip tightening on my walking stick. The smell got stronger with every step. By the time I pushed aside the last branch and saw the clearing by the riverbank, it was overwhelming. It was so thick it felt like I was breathing it, tasting it. It was the smell of rot and filth and something profoundly, deeply wrong. My eyes went to the nets, or what was left of them. They were a wreck. Dragged partway out of the water, tangled in the roots of a big cottonwood, just shredded. There were no fish, not a single one. All that was left were a few silvery scales glittering in the mud. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This wasn't an otter. This wasn't a bear. A bear would have just torn the net down and eaten its fill right there. This was different. This was a theft, a clean, brutal theft. And the smell, it clung to everything. It was in my hair, my clothes. I felt like I was going to be sick. That's when I saw the footprints. They were in the soft, black earth right at the water's edge. I knelt down, my knees sinking into the cold mud. My breath caught in my throat. They were huge. I'm not a small man, but I put my foot next to one of them. My foot was dwarfed. It had to be 18 inches long, easy. The shape was almost human. A heel, a ball, 5 toes. But it was all wrong. It was too wide, splayed out. The toes were long, and the print was deep, so deep. Whatever made this, it was heavy, impossibly heavy, and it had walked right out of the water, stood here looking at our nets, and then walked back into the woods. I followed the tracks with my eyes. They led away from the river, into the dark line of trees. The undergrowth was crushed where it had passed. I didn't follow. I couldn't. A cold dread had settled in my stomach, a solid lump of ice. I just stood there, frozen, the stench filling my lungs, staring at those impossible footprints. I ran back to the village. I didn't walk. I ran. I burst into the central clearing, my chest heaving, and the words tumbled out of me. I told them about the nets, the smell, the tracks. The fear on my face must have been contagious, because the usual morning chatter died instantly. The men gathered around, their expressions grim. My uncle, a man who has seen more winters than anyone, just nodded slowly, his face like stone. "The Stealer," he said, his voice low. "It is back." We went back as a group, 10 of us, all armed with spears and knives. Seeing the destruction in the light of day with other people around didn't make it any less terrifying. If anything, it was worse. The scale of it was clearer. The nets weren't just broken, they were ruined. The smell was still there, a physical presence. And the footprints, there were more of them now that we were looking, a whole set coming and going. It had been here for a while, just standing, watching our village from the tree line. We spent the rest of that day in a state of frantic, fearful activity. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? We had to move the nets. We decided to set them closer to the village, in a narrower part of the river where the bank was higher and we could keep a watch. The work was hard. The water was cold, numbing my hands and feet, but the cold I felt on the inside was worse. Every snap of a twig in the forest made me jump. Every time the wind shifted, I'd sniff the air, terrified that foul odor would come drifting back. We built a small watch platform in a tall fir tree that overlooked the new net site. It wasn't much, just some branches lashed together, but it gave a view of the river and the woods on both sides. We took turns watching through the night, 2 men at a time. I drew the first watch with my cousin. I remember climbing up there as the sun was setting, the sky turning a bloody red. The platform creaked under our weight. We sat there in the growing dark, wrapped in our hides, spears across our laps. The night was alive with sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of some small creature in the leaves, the endless gurgle of the river. Normal sounds, but every one of them felt like a threat. My eyes strained, trying to pierce the darkness between the trees. Was that a shadow moving, or just the wind? My heart wouldn't slow down. It was a frantic drumbeat in my chest. My cousin was just as tense. I could see the whites of his eyes gleaming in the starlight. We didn't speak. We just listened. Hours passed. The moon rose, a thin sliver that gave little light. The forest became a wall of blackness. My legs were cramping from sitting still for so long. I was just starting to think that maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't come tonight. That's when the smell hit us. It didn't come on the wind, it just arrived. One moment the air was clean and cold. The next it was thick with that same unbearable stench of decay and musk. It was so strong it made my eyes water. My cousin grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh. We both stared into the darkness, our spears held ready. We couldn't see anything, but we could hear it. It was a heavy, shuffling sound from the far side of the river, a sound of something big moving through the brush, not trying to be quiet. It was the sound of something that didn't care if it was heard. There was a series of soft, thick crunches, like someone stepping in deep mud. Then a low sound, so deep I felt it in my bones more than I heard it with my ears. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't a roar, it was a kind of guttural rumbling huff, a sound of exertion, or maybe frustration. It was on the other side of the river. Our nets were on this side. For a terrible, hopeful moment I thought it wouldn't cross. The river is wide and fast there, but the sounds kept moving, parallel to the bank. Upstream, it was heading for the shallows, the place where we used to set the nets. My blood ran cold. It knew, it remembered. We heard a tremendous splash as it entered the water. The shuffling, crushing sounds were replaced by the powerful, rhythmic thrashing of something massive wading across the river. We could see a disturbance in the water, a dark, hulking shape that was even blacker than the night around it. It was coming to our side. I was trembling all over. My teeth wanted to chatter, but I clenched my jaw shut. This was it. It was here. We were going to see it. The thing moved with a slow, deliberate power. It wasn't in a hurry. It reached our bank and hauled itself out of the water, with a sound like a great weight being dragged from the mud. We still couldn't see it clearly. It was just a colossal, upright shadow, blotting out the trees behind it. It had to be 8, 9 feet tall, maybe more. It stood there for a long time, dripping, its head moving slowly from side to side. I could hear its breathing, a wet, rasping sound that soared through the night. The smell was so potent now I had to fight not to gag. It took a step towards the village, then another. It wasn't heading for the new nets. It was coming towards us, towards the homes where our families were sleeping. A bolt of pure, undiluted terror shot through me. My cousin made a small choke sound next to me. We were frozen. What could we do? Throw our spears at that thing? It would be like throwing twigs. It stopped, its head tilted. It was looking right at our tree. It knew we were there. I could feel its gaze, a physical pressure. I stopped breathing. The world had shrunk to this platform, this creature, and the pounding of my own heart. I was sure it could hear it. It let out another one of those low, rumbling huffs. This one sounded different. It sounded almost intelligent, not like an animal. It was a sound of consideration, of assessment. Then it turned. It just turned its massive body and started walking away, back into the woods. It didn't run, it just disappeared between the trees, the crashing sounds of its passage growing fainter and fainter until they were gone. The smell lingered. It lingered for a long time. We sat on that platform until the sky began to turn grey with the coming dawn. We couldn't move. We were both shaking, soaked in a cold sweat that had nothing to do with the night air. When we finally climbed down, our legs were so weak we could barely stand. We checked the new nets. They were untouched. The creature hadn't even gone near them. It had come for something else. It had come to look, to remind us it was there. That was the worst of it, that single day and night. But it wasn't the end. The thefts have continued off and on for moons now. Sometimes it takes fish, sometimes it doesn't. We find the footprints, we smell the stench, we hear it in the woods. We've tried everything. Noises, fires, leaving offerings. Nothing works. It does what it wants. We never saw it clearly that night. Just a shape, a shadow. But that was enough. I see that shadow every time I close my eyes. I smell that smell in my dreams. We're always on guard now. We're always listening, always watching the tree line. We live in its shadow. We don't own this land anymore. We just share it with something we don't understand, something that could, if it wanted, just walk into our village and take whatever it likes, and we couldn't do a thing to stop it. We never caught it. We never will. It's still out there, and I know, as sure as I know the sun will rise, that it's watching us right now. Story 4. Okay, I'll just get this out. I've been putting it off for months, just typing and deleting, because part of me still feels crazy, and the other part is just scared. But I need to tell someone who might get it. So here goes. It was September 18th of last year, a Monday. I remember because I'd taken a couple days off work to extend the weekend, just me and my dog, Boone. He's a big guy, a German Shepherd and Rottweiler mix, about 110 pounds of solid muscle and loyalty. He's my shadow. My wife, she passed away from cancer 3 years ago, and it's just been me and him since. He's all I've got. We were headed to Norris Lake in Union County, Tennessee. I'd found this spot on a map, a little cove way off the main body of the lake, not marked for any official camping. Looked like you had to hike a bit down a gravel forestry road to get to it. Seemed perfect, quiet, isolated. Just what I wanted. The drive down was normal, beautiful even. Late summer, the trees were still thick and green, but I remember this one thing that stuck with me, even before we got to the lake. I needed gas and some ice, so I stopped at this little independent station, maybe 20 minutes from the turnoff to the cove. It was one of those old places, the kind with a screen door that slams and a bell that dings. The guy behind the counter was older, maybe in his 70s, with deep lines on his face and eyes that had seen a lot. I was paying for my gas and a bag of ice, and I just made casual conversation. I said, headed down to Norris Lake for some camping. He was counting my change, and he just stopped and looked up at me. Not at my eyes, but kind of through me. Which part? He asked, his voice gravelly. I told him I was aiming for a remote cove on the south end. Gave him the general area. He didn't say anything for a long second, just held my change. Then he pushed it across the counter. You be careful down there, he said, his voice low. Folks say things about them woods. Don't stay out after dark if you can help it. It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. It wasn't a friendly warning about bears. It was heavier than that. There was a real weight to it, a genuine concern. I just nodded, said, "Will do," and got out of there. I remember the feeling in my gut, a little cold knot forming. I shrugged it off as just an old superstitious local, but I didn't forget it. We found the turnoff, this overgrown gravel track that was more two ruts than a road. My truck bounced and scraped its way down for about a mile until it opened up into this small, pristine cove. It was gorgeous. The water was still and clear, surrounded by steep, heavily wooded hillsides. Not a soul in sight. Perfect. I started setting up camp. It was still bright out, maybe 4 in the afternoon. I got the tent up, started unpacking the cooler, the usual stuff. But Boone was acting weird from the moment I opened the truck door. He didn't bolt out like he usually does. He hopped down. But then he just stood there, stiff-legged, his nose working the air. His whole body was tense. He let out this low, rumbling growl, not his usual, "I see a squirrel" growl. This was deeper, a warning. "What is it, boy? A bear?" I said, trying to sound calm for both of us. I scanned the tree line. Nothing. Just deep, dark shadows between the trunks. The woods were dead quiet. No birds, no squirrels chattering. That's the thing that really started to get to me. The silence. It was absolute. He wouldn't relax. He kept pacing the perimeter of our little camp, his head low, sniffing the ground, then snapping his head up to stare into the timber. He'd growl, then whine, a high-pitched, anxious sound I'd never heard from him before. It put my nerves on edge. I found myself talking to him, just nonsense, trying to fill the silence. "It's okay, buddy. Probably just a smell. We're fine." I almost packed up and left right then. I should have. That feeling from the gas station came back, twice as strong. But I felt stupid, leaving because my dog was spooked and the woods were quiet. I convinced myself I was being ridiculous. We ate dinner as the sun went down. I had a fire going, but it didn't seem to push back the darkness like it usually does. It felt like the darkness was a physical thing pressing in on us. Boone wouldn't leave my side. He sat pressed against my leg, trembling, his eyes fixed on the woods. He wouldn't even eat his food. Eventually, we turned in. I zipped us into the tent, and he immediately curled up right next to me, his head on my chest. I could feel the rapid thump, thump, thump of his heart against my ribs. It took me a long time to fall asleep, listening to his whimpers and the utter, unnerving silence outside. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. The middle of the night, pitch black. Something had jolted me awake. It wasn't a sound, it was a smell. It was this overpowering, foul, musky odor. Like a combination of a wet dog, rotten meat and something else. Something pungent and wild, like a zoo enclosure that hasn't been cleaned in weeks. It was so thick, I could almost taste it in the back of my throat. It was disgusting. The second that smell hit my nose, Boone went berserk. He erupted from beside me with a snarling, barking fit I didn't know he was capable of. He wasn't just barking, he was screaming. He clawed at the tent door, ripping the zipper down in one frantic motion, and he was gone. Just vanished into the blackness. My heart was hammering against my sternum. "Boone!" I yelled, my voice cracking. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking so bad I could barely grip it. I scrambled out of the tent after him, the cold night air hitting me, that horrible smell everywhere. I flicked the flashlight on, the beam cutting a shaky path through the dark. "Boone, here boy, come on!" I heard a sound then, off to my left. Away from the water, it was a low, guttural growl, but it wasn't Boone. This was different, deeper. It was a sound you feel in your bones more than you hear with your ears. It made the fillings in my teeth vibrate. I swung the flashlight toward the sound, and I froze. My brain just stopped. It couldn't process what I was seeing. Maybe 30 feet away at the edge of the tree line stood a figure. It was massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing made me feel like a child. It had to be over 10 feet tall. It was covered in hair, long and shaggy, dark brown or black, matted and filthy. Its arms were impossibly long, hanging down past its knees. Its legs were thick, like tree trunks. It was just standing there, half-turned, like I'd interrupted it, and it was holding Boone. Boone was in the air, suspended by his throat in this thing's massive, long-fingered hand. My dog, 110 pounds of pure fight, was just hanging there, kicking weakly. He wasn't making a sound. Time stopped. My blood turned to ice water. Every story, every legend, every stupid TV show I'd ever seen, none of it mattered. This was real. It was standing right there. My flashlight beam, without me even thinking, traveled up its body and landed on its face. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a suit. The face was mostly flat, with a heavy brow ridge that cast deep shadows, but I saw its eyes. They reflected the light back at me, a dull, reddish glow, and its mouth. It pulled its lips back in a snarl. It wasn't a loud roar. It was this deep, rumbling, guttural vibration that came from its chest. I felt it through the soles of my boots. The ground seemed to tremble. The sound was pure, ancient rage. In that moment, something in me broke. The fear for myself vanished, completely swallowed by a terror for Boone. He was dying. Right in front of me, I didn't think. I just started talking. My voice was a ragged, pleading sob. "Please, please don't, please let him go. He's all I have, he's my dog, he's all I have left, please." I was begging, I was crying. I dropped the flashlight, I was so focused on it, on its face. The beam landed on the ground, casting its legs in a stark, long shadow. I kept repeating it. "He's all I have, please." I saw its hand. Its fingers, long and thick like sausages, were wrapped around Boone's neck. Boone had stopped kicking. His body was limp, and then it moved. Its fingers loosened, just a little. It didn't look away from me. Its head was tilted slightly as if it was listening, processing. The low rumble in its chest faded to a quiet, almost thoughtful growl. Then it opened its hand. Boone dropped to the ground like a sack of rocks. He landed with a soft thud and didn't move. A sob ripped out of me. I thought he was dead. The creature didn't make another sound. It slowly raised its other arm, the movement fluid and powerful, not clumsy at all. It pointed one of those long, terrifying fingers away from the woods, back down the path I'd come in on. Then it made this slow, deliberate, sweeping motion with its whole arm. A gesture, a clear, unmistakable command. Leave. I didn't need to be told twice. I didn't look at it again. I didn't care about the tent, the sleeping bags, the cooler, my phone charger, any of it. All of it was just stuff. It meant nothing. I scrambled over to Boone on my hands and knees. I was sobbing, my vision blurred. I put my hand on his side. I felt a faint, shallow rise and fall. He was breathing. He was alive. I scooped him up into my arms. He was a dead weight, completely unconscious. I stumbled back to my truck, which was thankfully only about 50 feet away. My legs were jelly. I was sure I was going to feel a massive hand on my shoulder any second, pulling me back. I fumbled with the keys, dropped them, picked them up with shaking hands, and finally got the door open. I laid Boone as gently as I could on the passenger seat, then ran around to the driver's side. I jammed the key in, turned it, and the engine roared to life. I threw it into reverse, spinning the tires, spraying gravel, and then slammed it into drive. I didn't turn my headlights on until I was halfway up the gravel track, terrified of what I might see in their beams. I drove like a man possessed. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I just focused on the twin cones of light on the road ahead, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my entire body shaking uncontrollably. Boone stirred about 20-25 miles later, I think. We were on a proper highway by then. I heard a soft whimper. I glanced over. He was trying to lift his head. He looked dazed, confused. There were dark, bruise-like marks around his neck where its fingers had been. I reached over and put a hand on him, and he licked my wrist once, weakly, before laying his head back down. We didn't stop. Not for gas, not for food, not for anything. I just drove. I crossed out of Tennessee and into Virginia before I even thought about slowing down. The sun was coming up, casting a pale, sickly light over everything. The normal world was returning, but it didn't feel normal anymore. It felt like a thin veneer over something much older and much, much darker. I never went back for my gear. It can rot there for all I care. Boone is okay, physically. The bruises faded after a week. But he's different, he's jumpier. He doesn't like the dark anymore. Sometimes he'll just sit and stare out the window into the backyard for hours, completely still. And so do I. We both just sit and stare. I can't explain what happened. I know what I saw. I know it showed me a mercy I have no right to comprehend. It understood me. It understood my words, my terror, my love for my dog. That's what haunts me more than its size, more than its smell, more than its strength. The intelligence in its eyes, the choice it made. I'll never set foot in those woods again, ever. That cove belongs to something else, and I think that old man at the gas station knew it all along. Story 5. I'll never forget the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Not for the usual reasons. Not because of the cooking, or the family coming into town, or the traffic. No, it's burned into my brain for something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist, something I saw with my own 2 eyes and still can't explain. Not to myself, not to anyone. It was me, my buddy who was driving, and his girlfriend in the back seat. We were on I-35 cutting through Kansas. The plan was simple: get to his parents' place a state over before the holiday chaos really kicked in. We'd left later than we meant to, of course. The sky was this flat, endless gray, and a light drizzle had started, the kind that doesn't really fall so much as just hang in the air, making everything slick and cold. The traffic was stop and go, the kind that makes your legs ache and your patience thin. We'd been crawling for what felt like an hour. I was in the passenger seat, just staring out the window, watching the world go by in a slow, miserable blur. The ditch running alongside the highway was deep, probably 10 or 12 feet down, filled with brown, dead-looking weeds and scraggly trees. The land beyond was just flat fields, divided by those old, rusty barbed wire fences stretching out to a horizon you could barely see through the mist. I remember shifting in my seat, trying to get comfortable, my jeans sticking to the leather. The heater was on too high, making the car stuffy, mixing with the smell of wet wool from our jackets. I was just zoning out, watching the water droplets zigzag down my window, tracing paths through the grime. And then I saw movement, down in the ditch, maybe 100 yards ahead on my side. Something was moving through the tall, wet grass. My first thought, my completely normal, logical thought, was that it was a dog, a big one, a lost farm dog, soaked and miserable, trudging through the muck. It was a dark shape, kinda low to the ground, and it was moving with a purpose, parallel to the highway. Look at that poor dog, I said, mostly to myself, nodding toward the window. My buddy, focused on the brake lights of the truck in front of us, just grunted. His girlfriend in the back was on her phone and didn't even look up. We crept forward in the traffic, and the shape got closer. 50 yards, then 30. The drizzle made everything hazy, like looking through a dirty lens. My eyes were fixed on it. It was big, really big for a dog, and its hair, it was long, dark, wet, stringy hair, plastered to its body by the rain. It was bent over, its front limbs, I thought they were front legs, touching the ground as it moved. It had a weird, loping gait, powerful but smooth. A little knot of something, not quite fear but unease, started to tighten in my stomach. That's no dog, part of my brain whispered. But what else could it be? A bear in Kansas. That was even more ridiculous. We drew almost level with it. I had a perfect, horrifically clear view, maybe 30 feet away and down in the ditch. The thing was just there. And then it reached the barbed wire fence that separated the ditch from the field. It didn't stop. It didn't crawl under or look for a gap. It just straightened up. I remember the sound I made. It wasn't a scream. It was this choked, guttural gasp. Like all the air had been punched out of me. My whole body went cold, 1,000 times colder than the November air outside. It rose, it uncoiled from that bent-over position and stood up on two legs, two long, powerful-looking legs. And it was huge. The ditch was deep and the fence was on the bank, so it was already elevated, but when it stood to its full height, its head was almost level with the road. With me. My mind shattered. It wasn't a dog, it wasn't a bear, it was a man, but it wasn't a man. It was covered head to toe in that long, wet, dark hair, like a wet rug had been thrown over a giant. The hair was matted with mud and leaves. I couldn't see a face, not really, just a suggestion of a head, a profile that was somehow both ape-like and not. There was a heavy brow, a flat nose, but it was the sheer size of it that froze the blood in my veins. It had to be 8 feet tall, maybe more. It was all shoulders and mass, and it moved with this impossible, casual strength. It took a step toward the fence, a single barbed wire fence, 3 strands, the kind that'll tear your jeans to shreds if you try to climb it. The creature didn't even break its stride. It lifted one of its legs, a leg thicker than my waist, and just stepped over the top wire. It didn't hunch down or struggle. It was like you or me stepping over a puddle on the sidewalk. An effortless, fluid motion. The barbs didn't seem to snag on its hair at all. It was so easy, so mundane for it, that it was terrifying. That's when I lost it. "Stop the car," I shouted. My voice was too high, strained. "Stop the goddamn car." My buddy jumped, startled. What is it?" He was looking at me, then frantically in the rearview mirror, thinking I'd seen an accident or something. "Back there, in the ditch. Did you see it?" I was twisted around in my seat, my hands pressing against the cold glass of the window, my breath fogging it up. I was frantic, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. The traffic, which had been crawling, suddenly started moving again. My body, conditioned by hours of driving, instinctively hit the gas. See what? A deer? I didn't see anything. It wasn't a deer, I practically screamed. It was a thing, a big thing. It just stepped over the fence. I was craning my neck, desperate for one more look, but we were already pulling away. The field was empty, just the grey rain falling on the brown grass, the lonely trees in the distance. The creature was gone. It had vanished into that line of trees to the west, moving with a speed that didn't seem possible for something that size. "Dude, you're freaking me out," his girlfriend said from the back, her voice small. "What did you see?" I tried to explain. The words tumbled out, a jumbled mess, a giant, hairy. It was walking on all fours. Then it stood up. It was so tall, and its hair was all wet and long. I saw the look they exchanged. It was a familiar look, the he's lost it look, the too much road trip, not enough sleep look. My buddy tried to be reasonable. It was probably just a big guy in a ghillie suit or something, a hunter. A hunter? My laugh was bitter, hysterical. Moving like that on all fours, stepping over a barbed wire fence like it was nothing? In the pouring rain, in the middle of nowhere, next to the interstate, who does that? He didn't have an answer. He just shrugged, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I don't know, man, I didn't see it." And that was the worst part. The absolute soul-crushing isolation of it. I had seen it. I had seen every detail. The way the water dripped from the ends of its long hair. The way the muscles in its back and shoulders moved under that shaggy coat as it stood up. The sheer, silent power of its movement. They hadn't. They were looking at the road, at their phones. Their world was still normal. Mine had just been torn in half. I fell silent for the rest of the drive. The cheerful holiday music on the radio felt like a mockery. The cozy warmth of the car felt suffocating. All I could see when I closed my eyes was that figure rising from the ditch, a dark giant against the grey Kansas sky. I kept running it over and over in my head, the wet hair. That was the detail that got me. It wasn't dry or clean. It was filthy, soaked, clinging to its body, making it look even more massive and primal. It belonged in a swamp or a deep, ancient forest, not in a drainage ditch off I-35. Its ease of movement. It wasn't clumsy or monstrous. It was efficient, almost graceful in its raw power. It knew exactly what it was doing. It had a destination, and it was going there. And a little thing like a barbed wire fence or a highway full of cars wasn't even a minor inconvenience. The feeling that settled in my gut wasn't just fear, though there was plenty of that. It was a deep, profound amazement, awe, the kind you feel when you see a tornado or a lightning strike up close. You're terrified, but you can't look away because you're witnessing something immense, something that operates on a different set of rules than your own safe, small world. We got to his parents' house. I went through the motions. I smiled, I shook hands, I ate turkey, but I was a ghost. My mind was still back on that highway in the drizzle, watching something impossible step out of a ditch and into the trees. Every time someone laughed or told a story, it felt like they were on the other side of a thick pane of glass. I was alone with what I'd seen. Later that night, lying in the guest room, I stared at the ceiling. The house was quiet. I could hear the wind picking up outside. I thought about the creature. Where was it now? Was it still out there, moving through the cold, rainy night? Was it watching other cars from the shadows? Did it even care that I or anyone had seen it? The way it moved, so purposefully, made me think it didn't. We were just noise. We were irrelevant. I've turned it over in my head 1,000 times since that Wednesday. I've read every account, every story I can find online. I know what people call it, but giving it a name doesn't make it less terrifying. If anything, it makes it worse. It means I'm not the only one. It means this thing, or things like it, are out there, living in the edges of our world. stepping over our fences without a second thought. I didn't smell anything. I've read that sometimes there's a smell, but with the windows up and the rain, I didn't. I didn't hear anything either. No roar or scream. Just the swish of our tires on the wet pavement and the drone of the engine. It was utterly, completely silent. A silent giant in the rain. That's what stays with me the most. The silence. The ease. The way it just disappeared into the landscape, as if it had never been there at all. But I know it was. I saw it. And sometimes, on a rainy day, when I'm driving on a long, empty road, I find myself staring into the ditches, my heart starting to beat just a little bit faster, wondering what else is moving through them, just out of sight. Story 6. That night, we'd stayed up late around the fire, roasting the last of the hot dogs and telling stupid stories. The kids were finally starting to wind down, their laughter getting quieter, the long days of hiking and swimming catching up to them. The fire was just embers, a deep orange glow that pulsed with the slight breeze. The woods were loud with the usual night sounds, crickets, the occasional cry of something far off, the leaves rustling. It was a comfortable noise, the sound of the forest breathing. I remember looking at the stars, clearer out here than anywhere I'd ever been, and feeling a deep sense of peace. The peace feels like a joke now, something I was stupid to ever feel. I'd drunk a couple of beers, and around 1 in the morning my bladder decided it was time to make the trek to the outhouse. Our camp was maybe 60, 70 yards from the pit toilet the Forest Service had built. It was a solid wooden structure, a welcome sight compared to just digging a hole. I grabbed my flashlight, the big, heavy mag light that could double as a club, and told the boys I'd be right back. My nephew Kyle just grunted from his sleeping bag, already half asleep. The walk over was fine. My flashlight beam cut a clean path through the absolute blackness. It was cold, the kind of damp cold that seeps into your bones in the Pacific Northwest. Even in late summer, I could see my breath. I did my business in the outhouse, the smell of lime and decay sharp in my nose, and stepped back out, zipping up my jacket. I remember pausing for a second, just listening to the night. That's when I heard it. Not an animal sound. I know animal sounds. This was different. It was a rustling in the bushes off to my left, down near the lakeshore. Not the light skittering of a raccoon or a deer. This was heavier, more deliberate, like something big was pushing its way through the thick salal and ferns. I froze, my hand tightening on the flashlight. I pointed the beam in that direction, but the light just got swallowed by the wall of darkness. It couldn't penetrate more than 20 feet into that tangle. Then it stopped. The rustling just ceased. The night went quiet. Too quiet. The crickets had stopped chirping. Everything had. It was that dead, heavy silence that feels like a physical weight. My heart was starting to thump in my ears. I was just standing there in the clearing by the outhouse, completely exposed. That's when I heard the first thump. It came from the same direction as the rustling, maybe 100 yards away, but it wasn't a sound you just hear. It was a sound you feel, a deep, solid, resonant thump that vibrated right through the soles of my boots and up into my chest. It felt like when you're standing next to a subwoofer at a concert, that low-frequency punch that hits you in the sternum. But this was out in the middle of the woods. There was no source for a sound like that. It was just a thump, a single, purposeful impact. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I was trying to process it, my brain flipping through a catalogue of every possible thing it could be. A falling tree? No, it was too clean, too singular. Some kind of machinery. We were miles from any road. It made no sense. Then, a few seconds later, a second thump. Same sound, same deep resonance that made my ribs hum. And it was closer, a lot closer. If the first one was 100 yards away, this one was maybe 50. My brain, stupid with fear, was trying to measure the distance based on the intensity of the vibration in my chest. 50 yards, that's half a football field. Something big had just covered 50 yards in a matter of seconds in thick, dark, overgrown forest without making a single sound of movement. I finally managed to turn my head, my neck stiff with tension, and look back toward our camp. The glow of our dying fire was just a faint smudge in the distance. It looked a million miles away. The third thump came. This one was so close, 30 yards, maybe less, that I actually gasped. The vibration was so strong, it felt like someone had thumped me right in the chest with a closed fist. My teeth rattled. Whatever was making that sound was now just inside the tree line, hidden in the absolute blackness, but so close. I could feel its presence. It's hard to explain, but you know when someone is standing behind you, even if you can't see them. This was like that, but amplified by 1,000. It was a primal, gut-level knowledge that something immense was right there, just beyond the reach of my light, and it was looking right at me. That's when the fear truly seized me. It wasn't just being scared, it was a total body-consuming terror that short-circuited every rational thought. My legs were jelly, my hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the flashlight. I didn't think. I just ran. I've never run like that in my life. I sprinted for that campfire glow, my feet pounding on the hard-packed dirt, my breath coming in ragged, panicked sobs. I didn't look back. I was too terrified of what I might see gaining on me. I burst into the campsite, stumbling over a log and nearly falling into the fire pit. The 4 boys were all sitting up in their sleeping bags, their faces pale in the dim light. "What was that?" Kyle asked, his voice tight. "We heard it, those booms." They'd heard it too, all 3 thumps vibrating through the ground. They'd felt them in their chests, just like I had. They were scared, wide-eyed, looking at me for an explanation I didn't have. I was bent over, hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath, my heart trying to punch its way out of my ribcage. "I don't know," I finally managed to get out. "There's something out there." We all just stood there, huddled around the faint warmth of the embers, listening. The forest was still dead silent. No crickets, no owls, nothing. It was the most unnerving part. The normal nightlife was gone, scared into submission. We were alone in a bubble of silence with whatever had made that sound. We heard the rustling then. It was back, closer to camp this time. A slow, heavy, dragging sound through the underbrush. It wasn't trying to be quiet. It was moving, circling us. We couldn't see anything. Our campfire light didn't extend more than 15 feet into the trees, and beyond that was a wall of pure, impenetrable black. Then another thump. This one was off to our right, maybe 40 yards away. The vibration was weaker this time, but it was unmistakable. It was answering the question we were all too afraid to ask. It was still here. One of the boys, I think it was Jake, whispered, "Should we go look? With the flashlights?" "No," I said, and my voice was sharper than I meant it to be. "Nobody goes anywhere. Nobody leaves this circle." The thought of any of us stepping even a foot into that darkness made me feel physically sick. We were prey, and we had just been cornered. We spent the next hour, though it felt like a lifetime, sitting on the ground, backs to the fire, staring out into the nothingness. We didn't talk. We just listened. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of a leaf made us jump. Our heads were on a swivel. I had my maglite in one hand and a hatchet in the other, my knuckles white. I've never felt so helpless. We were just sitting there, waiting for something to happen, completely at the mercy of a thing we couldn't see. That was the worst of it. The imagining. My mind was conjuring up every possible horror. I pictured it, a huge dark shape covered in hair, moving with a silence that shouldn't be possible for its size. I imagined it stepping into the edge of the firelight, all muscle and shadow and menace. The fear was a cold knot in my stomach that just kept tightening. I could smell it, or I thought I could, a musky, wet dog, earthy smell that came and went on the breeze. It might have been my imagination, but the others mentioned it later too. The thumps didn't come again. The rustling eventually stopped. The normal night sounds, The crickets, the frogs, slowly, tentatively started back up. It was as if whatever had been out there had finally gotten bored and moved on. The pressure lifted. The bubble of silence popped. We didn't sleep. Not a wink. We just sat there, feeding the fire until the sun started to turn the sky grey. The relief that came with the dawn was overwhelming. A physical sensation of the terror draining from my body, leaving me exhausted and shaky. We packed up our gear in a frantic, silent hurry, not even bothering with breakfast. We just wanted to be gone. The hike back to the car was tense. We were all looking over our shoulders, jumping at every little sound. The woods, which had seemed so beautiful and welcoming just a day before, now felt like a hostile watching place. We drove into the little town of Kettle Falls and got a hot meal at a diner, and we just sat there, not talking much, just processing. A few weeks after we got back home, the memory of those thumps was still eating at me. I work in construction, and one day we were pouring a cement footer for a new house. The guy operating the tamper, a big, flat plate on a stick that vibrates to settle the concrete, hit a particularly dense patch. The machine let out a deep, resonant thump that traveled right up through my boots. It was the sound. It was exactly the same sound I'd heard that night, the same frequency, the same chest-rattling vibration. My blood ran cold. I just stood there, staring at the guy with the tamper. To make something like that sound in the woods, without any machinery, the force required was just impossible. It would have to be something massive, hitting a tree or the ground with incredible power. I started digging online, looking for other people who might have heard something similar. I found them, lots of them, in Bigfoot forums, in camping groups, people describing the exact same thing, the wood knocks, the chest-thumping thumps. I read one account from a guy who'd been camping not 10 miles from Davis Lake a few years before. He said he'd been woken up in the middle of the night by a feeling of being watched. He looked out the small window of his camper trailer, and staring back at him was a face. A huge, hairy face with dark, intelligent eyes, pressed right up against the glass. He said the smell was overwhelming, like a wet gorilla. He hid under his blankets until morning, and when he looked, there were smudges on the window and huge footprints in the mud outside. Reading that, everything clicked into place with a horrible final certainty. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't my imagination. We hadn't been chased by some random unknown animal. We had been stalked. We'd been hunted, and the thing that was hunting us was a Sasquatch. That knowledge didn't bring any comfort. It did the opposite. It solidified the fear, made it permanent. I don't go camping anymore. I get anxious if I have to be in a wooded area after dark. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and I'm trying to fall asleep, I'll hear the house settle or the furnace kick on, and for a split second, my brain mistakes it for that deep, resonant thump. My heart leaps into my throat, and I'm right back there, frozen in the clearing by the outhouse, completely helpless, knowing with every fiber of my being that something ancient and powerful and utterly terrifying is standing just beyond the trees, watching me. And I know with a certainty that chills me to my core that it could have taken any one of us that night if it had wanted to. We'll never know why it didn't. And story 7. And the day itself was uneventful. We'd gone for a long hike, cooked burgers over the fire, and were just lounging around, full and happy, as the sun went down. The cabin was one of those rustic A-frame jobs, wood-paneled inside, with a big picture window looking out into a thick wall of pine trees. It felt cozy, not creepy. We were playing cards. Steve was teasing me about my terrible poker face, and David was trying to convince everyone that s'mores were a legitimate dinner course. It was just nice. The first thing that was off was the silence. I didn't even realize it at first, but someone, I think it was Lisa, said, "Hey, did the crickets stop?" And they had. 1 minute there was that constant, buzzing night chorus, and the next, nothing. It was like someone had thrown a soundproof blanket over the whole forest. We all kind of paused for a second, listening, and then Steve joked that a bear must be wandering through and shushed all the bugs. We laughed it off and went back to the game. Maybe 20 minutes later, I heard the first tink. It was so faint I thought I'd imagined it. A little sound like a small pebble hitting the side of the cabin. Then another. Tink. Then a few more in quick succession. Tink, tink, tink. Like someone was gently flicking gravel at the wall. "What is that?" I asked, putting my cards down. "What's what?" Steve said, not looking up from his hand. "That clicking noise, on the wall." Everyone stopped then and listened. For a moment there was nothing. Then, thump. This was heavier. Not a pebble, a rock. It hit the wooden wall with a solid, dull sound. My heart did a little skip. We all looked at each other. David got up and went to the window, cupping his hands around his eyes to see past his own reflection. "Can't see a thing," he said. "Pitch black out there." Then it started in earnest. It wasn't a hail of stones, but it was persistent. Thump, tink, tink, thump. They were hitting different sides of the cabin now. The one on the roof made us all jump. It was so unnerving because there was no logic to it. It wasn't an animal scratching to get in. It was just projectiles, like we were being pelted. My skin started to crawl. This wasn't a prank. We were miles from anyone else. And that's when the smell hit me. It's hard to describe a smell, but I'll never forget this one. It came in through the cracks around the windows, under the door. It was a thick, heavy odor, a mix of things, like a wet dog, but 1,000 times stronger and ranker, mixed with the metallic tang of old blood and something else. Something rotten, like a carcass that's been left in the sun for a week. It was suffocating. Lisa gagged and covered her nose and mouth with her sweater. Steve's face was just a mask of confusion and disgust. "What the hell is that?" he muttered, his voice tight. That's when the big one hit. It wasn't a rock. It was something massive. A loud, sickening crack, followed by a shudder that went right through the floorboards and up my spine. The whole cabin vibrated. A framed picture of a moose fell off the wall, and the glass shattered. Everyone screamed or yelled. We all scrambled away from the walls, huddling towards the center of the room. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I felt dizzy. I remember grabbing Steve's arm, my fingers digging into his jacket. For a few seconds, there was absolute silence again, except for our ragged breathing. The smell was still there, clinging to the air, making it hard to breathe. David, who was the most outdoorsy of us all, was staring at the window with wide, terrified eyes. He looked pale. "What was that?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "A tree branch." David just shook his head slowly. "No, that was something thrown, something big. The bravest, or maybe the most foolish thing we did was look outside." Steve and David went to the door, and Steve slowly unlocked it and pulled it open just a crack. The smell intensified, a hot wave of decay that made my eyes water. Steve peered out, then opened the door a little wider. His body went rigid. "Oh my God," he breathed. I rushed to his side and looked out. The motion sensor light on the corner of the cabin had flicked on, casting a harsh white glow on a patch of the forest floor about 30 feet away. And that's when I saw them. Not it. Them. There were two of them. Tall is an understatement. They were enormous, maybe 8 or 9 feet tall, but they weren't bulky like a gorilla. They were slender, almost wiry, with long arms that swung easily at their sides. Their bodies were covered in what looked like shaggy, dark brown hair, but it was matted and clumped. They were walking away from the cabin, moving into the deeper darkness of the trees, and they moved gracefully. There's no other word for it. It wasn't a clumsy, lurching walk. It was smooth, fluid, almost silent. Their legs moved with a powerful, easy rhythm, like they were part of the forest itself. They didn't look back. They just vanished between two large pines, swallowed by the shadows, as if they'd never been there. The whole sighting lasted maybe 3 seconds. The door slammed shut. Steve had thrown his weight against it, fumbling with the lock. He turned around. his back pressed against the wood, his chest heaving. His face was as white as a sheet. "Did you see that?" he gasped. "Did you guys see that?" We had. We all had. No one spoke. What could we say? We just stared at each other, the reality of what we'd just witnessed crashing down on us. They weren't bears. They weren't people in costumes. The proportions were all wrong. The height, the way they moved, it was impossible. That's when David, his voice low and shaky, said the word Sasquatch. It hung in the foul-smelling air. It sounded ridiculous. It sounded insane. But in that moment, with the memory of those tall, slender figures burned into my mind, it was the only thing that fit, the only thing that could explain what we were seeing and smelling. We spent the next hour in a state of paralyzed terror. We turned off all the lights inside, hoping to see out without being seen. We were huddled on the floor, peering out the bottom of the windows. The smell gradually faded, but the silence remained, that heavy, watchful silence. Every creak of the cabin, every snap of a cooling log in the fireplace made us jump. My muscles were so tense they ached. I kept replaying the image of those things walking away, the effortless way they moved. I felt small, prey. Then the sound started. It began with a low grunt, so deep it was more a vibration in the air than a sound you heard with your ears. It came from the tree line, the same direction they'd gone. It was followed by another, and then a third from a slightly different spot. They were communicating. My blood ran cold. This was real. This was happening. The grunts were joined by these whooping calls. They weren't like any animal I'd ever heard. Not a coyote, not an owl. They were complex, rising and falling, echoing through the woods. It sounded like there were more than two of them out there, a lot more. The sounds would stop for a minute, and we'd hold our breath, and then they'd start up again from a different direction, like they were circling us. We were all crying by then, just quiet, terrified tears. Steve had his arm around me, but he was trembling just as hard as I was. We were clutching each other, a pile of fear on the dusty cabin floor. This went on for what felt like an eternity. The whoops and grunts were terrifying, but they were just the warm-up. The scream is what broke us. It came from so close, right outside the window we were crouched under. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. It was a sound of pure, undiluted rage and intelligence. That's the worst part. It wasn't a mindless roar. It was a shriek of fury that felt like it had meaning behind it. The pitch was inhuman, starting low and ripping up into a deafening high-frequency wail that felt like it was drilling directly into the most primitive part of my brain. It was a blood-curdling scream, a sound that promised violence. I'm not ashamed to say I screamed too. We all did. Lisa outright fainted, just slumped over. The sound was so loud, so close, it felt like the thing was in the room with us. The windows rattled in their frames. The scream seemed to go on, tearing through the night, and then it was cut off, abruptly. Silence, but not the empty silence from before. This was a thick, waiting silence. The kind of silence that comes after a gunshot. That was the terror moment, that scream. It filled me with a primal fear I didn't know I was capable of feeling. It was a deep, cellular knowledge that we were not at the top of the food chain out here. We were intruders. We were being warned. "We have to get to the cars," David whispered, his voice cracking. "Now." It was the only plan. The cars were parked about 50 feet away, down a short path. 50 feet might as well have been 50 miles. No one moved. We were frozen, listening. Another scream echoed from further away, answered by a series of whoops that seemed to be getting closer again. Somehow we moved. Steve and David half carried, half dragged Lisa. I don't even remember getting off the floor or unlocking the door. The next thing I knew, we were outside, stumbling in the dark, our panicked breaths puffing out in white clouds in the cold air. The motion sensor light didn't come on this time. It was just pitch black. I was certain I was going to feel a massive, hairy hand close around my arm at any second, that I was going to hear that scream right in my ear. We fumbled for the car doors, piling into two SUVs. The sound of the doors slamming shut, the locks clicking into place, was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Steve was in the driver's seat, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and he flipped on the high beams. The twin beams of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the clearing in front of the cabin, the path, the trees. There was nothing there, no movement, no figures, just the quiet, still forest. We didn't wait. Steve threw the car into reverse, spun us around, and we sped down that dirt road as fast as he dared, our headlights bouncing wildly, illuminating the tunnel of trees. No one spoke the whole way into the town of Mammoth Lakes. We just sat there, shell-shocked, wrapped in the lingering phantom of that horrible smell. We went straight to the sheriff's office. Telling the deputy what happened was humiliating. He was polite, but his expression was a mixture of skepticism and pity. He took our statement, asked if we'd been drinking, and suggested it was probably a bear. We insisted we knew what bears looked like. We told him about the figures, the smell, the rocks, the scream. He just nodded and wrote it down. The next morning, in the cold, clear light of day, we went back to the cabin with the deputy to get our things. The place was a wreck inside from our panic, but outside there was nothing. No giant footprints in the soft dirt around the cabin. No broken branches, no evidence at all. The deputy poked around for a few minutes, then gave us a look that said, "See bears." But we did see. We all saw, we all smelled it, we all heard that scream. We packed our stuff in record time and left. We didn't even say goodbye properly. We just got in our cars and drove home, each couple lost in their own private horror. It's been over a year now. Steve and I don't talk about it much. It's like this shared, raw wound. But sometimes, at night, if the house is too quiet, I'll remember that absolute silence right before the first pebble hit. I'll remember the graceful, terrifying walk of those tall, slender figures as they disappeared into the trees. And I'll remember the scream, that god-awful scream that didn't belong to anything on any chart or in any book. It was a sound that shouldn't exist, and I lie there in the dark, my heart starting to hammer all over again, knowing that it does. Story 8. But the last few times we've been out there, things have been off, not right. And on this latest trip, everything came to a head. I'm going to tell you about that day because it's the one that's burned into my brain. I'm not some big storyteller, and I'm not trying to make this sound like a movie. It's just what happened, and I'm still messed up over it. We got to Summer Lake early that morning, around 9 o'clock. The sun was out, but it was still cool, with that damp forest smell you only get in places like this. My wife was setting up the tent, the same one we've used for years, and I was unloading the cooler and gear from the truck. Rocky was already sniffing around, wagging his tail, doing his usual perimeter check. Everything felt normal at first, just like old times, but in the back of my mind I was on edge. See, the last 2 trips we'd had some weird stuff happen. The first time, a few months back, we woke up to find our tent collapsed. Not like it fell over. It was pushed in. Like something big had leaned on it. We figured it was a bear or maybe some idiot's dog from another campsite, but there was no one else around. Then, the next trip, we found our snacks torn open, stuff scattered everywhere, and a big rip in the screen flap of the tent. Again, we blamed a bear, but it felt different. Bears don't usually tear screens so neatly, and they'd have made more of a mess with the food. So this time I'd brought my .357 Magnum revolver. I'm not some gun nut. I've had it for years, mostly for peace of mind when we're out in the middle of nowhere. My wife thought I was overreacting, but after the last trip she didn't argue. We set up camp, and I made sure the gun was loaded and within reach in the tent. Rocky seemed fine at first, but as the day went on, he started acting weird. He'd stop what he was doing, ears perked up, and stare into the woods. Not his usual curious look. This was intense, like he was on high alert. A couple of times he let out low growls, which he almost never does. My wife noticed it too, and we exchanged looks but didn't say much. We just tried to go about our day. We spent the morning fishing by the lake. The water was clear and you could see the bottom in some spots. Rocky stayed close, not venturing off like he usually does. Around noon, we decided to hike around the shore to this marshy area on the other side. It's a spot we've explored before, kind of boggy with tall reeds and soft ground. Rocky was leading the way, but he kept stopping and barking toward the trees. Not his happy bark. This was aggressive, like he was warning something off. My wife grabbed my arm and said, "Shannon, what's up with him?" I shrugged, but my heart was starting to beat faster. We've seen bears out here before, but they usually run off when they hear us. We got to the marshy area, and that's when things got really strange. The ground was wet from recent rains, and as we walked, I noticed these huge footprints. I mean, massive. I've seen bear tracks. Black bears around here have paws maybe 5-6 inches long. These were, I don't know, at least 18 inches long, and they had claws. Deep impressions, like whatever made them was heavy. I crouched down to look and my stomach dropped. They weren't bear tracks. Bears walk on all fours, and these were bipedal, like something walking on 2 feet. The claws were sharp, dug into the mud, and the stride was long, like it was taking big steps. Rocky was sniffing them and whining. Then he started barking again, this time toward the trees across the marsh. I stood up, and my wife was just staring at the footprints, her face pale. "What the hell is that?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. We've camped here for 8 years, and we've never seen anything like it. My mind went to Bigfoot, but I pushed it away. That's crazy, right? People talk about it, but it's just stories. But looking at those tracks, I felt a chill run down my spine. They were too big for any animal I know, and the claw marks. It didn't make sense. We decided to head back to camp, but Rocky wouldn't let it go. He kept pulling on his leash, barking at the woods. We were about halfway back when he suddenly froze, and his bark turned into this deep, guttural growl. I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw it. Across the marsh on the opposite shore, there was this dark, bipedal shape moving through the trees. It was tall, way taller than a person, and it was walking, but not like a human. It was slow, deliberate, almost gliding. The hair on my arms stood up, and I felt this primal fear kick in. My wife gasped and squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. The shape stopped for a second, and even from that distance, I could tell it was looking right at us. I couldn't see details. It was too far, and the trees were thick, but it was dark, almost black and bulky. Rocky was going insane, barking and pulling, and I knew we had to do something. I fumbled for my revolver, my hands shaking. I'm not a hero. I was terrified, but I thought if I fired a warning shot, maybe it would scare whatever it was away. I raised the gun and fired twice into the ground near our feet. The sound was deafening, echoing across the lake. I've shot that gun before at ranges, but out here it felt like the whole forest went silent after. The shape didn't run. It just retreated, but not like an animal would. It turned slowly and moved back into the trees, that same unnatural glide. It didn't hurry, like it wasn't afraid. That's what got me. If it was a bear, it would have bolted. This thing just faded into the shadows like it was in control. We stood there for what felt like forever, just staring. Rocky had quieted down, but he was trembling. My wife was crying softly, and I was trying to catch my breath. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. We didn't say anything. We just turned and hurried back to camp. The whole way, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see it following us. The woods felt different, darker, heavier, like we were being watched. When we got back to camp, we didn't even discuss it. We started packing up as fast as we could. Our hands were shaking and we were dropping stuff, but we just threw everything into the truck. Rocky jumped in the back and we drove off without looking back. We didn't stop until we hit the main road, and even then we kept driving for hours. We got home late that night and we both just sat in the driveway for a while, not talking. The next day, I called the local forestry department. I told them what happened, about the footprints and the shape. The guy on the phone was polite but dismissive. He said they get calls like that sometimes, but without physical evidence or photos, there's not much they can do. They're understaffed, and they can't investigate every weird report. He suggested it was probably a bear or someone playing a prank. But I know what I saw, and those footprints weren't from any bear around here. We haven't been back to Summer Lake since, and I don't think we ever will. Rocky's been jumpy too, barks at nothing sometimes. My wife and I talk about it occasionally, but it's like if we say too much, it makes it more real. I keep going over it in my head, trying to find another explanation, but I can't. That thing was there, and it wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal I've ever seen. The way it moved, slow, almost calm, like it knew we were there and didn't care. And those footprints, 18 inches long, with claws. I measured them with my boot. My foot is size 10, and they were way bigger. I'm not looking for answers or anything. I just needed to share this, because it's eating me up. Maybe someone else has seen something similar out there. All I know is that day changed everything. We thought Summer Lake was our escape, but now it feels like a place we can't go back to. And every time I close my eyes, I see that dark shape moving through the trees, and I feel that same cold fear. I don't know what it was, but I know it was real, and I'll never forget it. Story 9. The hike-in was peaceful at first. The woods were thick with pine and birch, and the ground was soft underfoot from recent rains. I could smell that damp earth mixed with the sharp scent of needles. Birds were chirping, and everything felt normal, the way it should. But after about an hour, the trail started to get overgrown, like not many people came this way. Branches scraped against my arms, and I had to push through some bushes. It was quiet, too quiet, like the animals had all decided to take the day off. I didn't think much of it then. I was just focused on finding that lake. When I finally broke through the trees, there it was, this secluded little lake, maybe a couple 100 yards across, surrounded by steep banks and dense forest. The water was so still it looked like glass, reflecting the blue sky and the trees around it. It felt private, almost sacred, like I'd stumbled into a place nobody else knew about. I found a flat spot near the shore, dropped my knapsack, and set up a simple picnic. I ate my lunch slowly, just enjoying the solitude. The sun was high now, and it was getting warm, so I decided to go for a swim. I stripped down to my underwear, didn't bring a swimsuit, wasn't planning on it, and waded in. The water was cold, shockingly so, but in a good way. It felt refreshing after the hike. I swam out a bit, floating on my back and looking up at the sky. For a while, everything was perfect. But then, out of nowhere, this feeling hit me, like someone was watching. You know that prickling on the back of your neck? I felt it before in the woods, but never this intense. I shrugged it off at first, thinking it was just nerves from being alone. I swam back to shore, dried off with my shirt, and started packing up my things. That's when I heard it, a sound I can't even describe properly. It wasn't a howl or a scream, more like a hollering, deep and aggressive, echoing from across the lake. It sent chills straight down my spine, the kind that make your hair stand on end. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I froze, just staring out over the water. The sound came again, louder this time, and it felt like it was aimed right at me. I fumbled for my binoculars, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped them. I raised them to my eyes and scanned the opposite shore. At first I didn't see anything, just trees and water. Then movement caught my eye, something big, really big, standing waist deep in the lake. I adjusted the focus and my breath caught. It was a creature, easily 9 feet tall, covered in hair that was clean and black, almost shimmering in the sunlight. and I could see breasts, distinct female breasts. It was a female Bigfoot, just standing there like it was bathing or something. It didn't seem to notice me at first. It was just swaying slightly, making low, guttural sounds. I couldn't look away. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. This wasn't some blurry photo or campfire story. It was right there, real. The hair wasn't matted or dirty. It looked almost well kept, like it had been groomed. The breasts were prominent, and the whole thing moved with a grace that felt unnatural for something that size. I felt a mix of awe and pure terror. Part of me wanted to run, but I was rooted to the spot, just watching through the binoculars. For about 10 minutes it stayed there, occasionally dipping its hands into the water. Then, without warning, it dove headfirst into the lake. Not a splashy dive, but smooth and quick, like it was used to it. I waited, expecting it to surface, but it never did. The water just settled back into that glassy stillness. I kept staring, my heart hammering against my ribs, but nothing. No bubbles, no movement, nothing. That's when the fear really set in. I lowered the binoculars, my hands still trembling, and I started scanning the shore for any sign. I walked along the edge, looking for wet footprints or broken branches, but there was nothing. The ground was soft in spots, but no tracks, like it had never been there. That made it worse. How could something that big leave no trace? My mind was screaming at me to get out of there. I rushed back to my picnic spot, shoved everything into my knapsack haphazardly, not even bothering to fold my clothes properly. As I started hiking back, the feeling of being watched came back, stronger than ever. This time it felt like it was coming from above, from the trees. I kept glancing up, but I couldn't see anything except leaves and branches. Then I heard noises, rustling, like something big was moving through the canopy, leaping from tree to tree. It wasn't the wind. It was too rhythmic, too purposeful. Branches would snap, and I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, but whenever I looked directly, nothing was there. My skin was crawling, and I was sweating despite the cool air. I walked faster, almost running, my boots slipping on the damp trail. The hike back felt twice as long as the way in. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound made me jump. I kept expecting to see that thing step out in front of me, but it never did. When I finally reached the parking lot, the sun was starting to dip lower, casting long shadows. There was an attendant there, an older guy I'd seen before. He took one look at me and said I was white as a ghost. I mumbled something about not feeling well, maybe ate something bad, and I didn't stick around to chat. I just got in my car, started the engine, and drove off as fast as I could. I didn't look back. The whole drive home, my hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following me, but it was just empty road. That night I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I just sat in my chair, replaying it all in my head. The image of that creature, the sound, the way it vanished, it's burned into my memory. Even now, all these years later, I can close my eyes and see it clear as day. I never went back alone, and when I did return with friends years later, it was different. But that's another story. For that one day in 1967, I was alone with something I still can't explain, and it changed how I see the woods forever. Story 10. I was heading to this fish pond I've visited a bunch of times. It's not too far from the river, kind of tucked away in a clearing surrounded by thick underbrush and old oaks. I usually go there to just sit and watch the water, maybe see some birds or deer. That day, I was feeling a bit restless, so I decided to take a longer route, crunching over damp leaves and dodging low-hanging branches. The ground was soft under my boots, and I could hear the usual sounds, squirrels chattering, the distant rush of the river, that kind of thing. Nothing out of the ordinary. As I got closer to the pond, maybe about 50 feet away, I spotted something moving near the water's edge. At first I thought it was a person, maybe a fisherman or someone else out for a walk, but then I paused, because the shape was off. It was huge, way bigger than any man I've ever seen. I mean, I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing made me feel small. It was covered in dark, matted hair, almost like a bear, but it was standing in a way that wasn't right for an animal. Its arms were ridiculously long, hanging down past its knees, and it was leaning over the pond, kind of hunched but still towering. My heart started thumping right away, like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. I froze in place, ducking behind a thick pine tree without even thinking. The bark was rough against my palm, and I could feel my fingers trembling as I held on. I peeked around the trunk, trying to get a better look without being seen. The creature was focused on the water, swinging its arms in these violent, sweeping motions. It wasn't just dipping its hands in, it was slamming them down, sending water flying everywhere. I could hear the splashes from where I was, loud and chaotic, like someone throwing rocks into the pond. Each time it moved, its muscles bulged under that shaggy coat, and I could see the sheer brute strength in its actions. It was catching fish, I realized, grabbing them out of the water with its hands and tossing them onto the bank. There were a few silvery bodies already lying there, glinting in the sun. I've seen bears fish before, but this was different. Bears are kind of clumsy in water, but this thing was efficient, almost methodical. Its movements were powerful but not graceful, like it was putting all its weight into every swing. The water would shoot up in arcs, droplets catching the light, and I could smell the damp, fishy scent carried on the breeze. My mouth went dry, and I had to swallow hard, my throat tight. I remember thinking, this isn't right, this isn't human. But it wasn't a bear either. The proportions were all wrong. Its shoulders were broad, and it had this upright posture that made it seem almost man-like. But the size and the hair, God, the hair was thick and dark, clinging to its body in wet clumps. I stayed hidden, pressing myself against the tree, trying to make myself as small as possible. The ground beneath me was damp, and I could feel the cold seeping through my jeans. My breathing was shallow, and I kept telling myself to stay calm. But every time the creature moved, my stomach would clench. I was terrified it would hear me or catch my scent. The woods were quiet, except for the splashing and the occasional rustle of leaves. Even the birds had gone silent, which made everything feel even more eerie. Then, after what felt like forever but was probably only a few minutes, the creature straightened up. It stood fully upright, and I swear it had to be at least 7 or 8 feet tall. Its head turned slowly, and it scanned the trees around the pond. That's when I saw its eyes, dark, almost black, and they seemed to gleam in the shadows. They weren't like any animal eyes I've seen. They had this intensity, like it was really looking for something or someone. My blood ran cold. I felt this wave of pure fear wash over me, so strong that my legs felt weak. I thought, if it sees me, it could cover the distance in seconds. The way it moved earlier, with that raw power, I knew I wouldn't stand a chance. I could almost feel its gaze sweeping over the area, and I held my breath, praying it wouldn't lock onto me. My mind was racing. I thought about backing away slowly, but I was afraid any movement would give me away. The pine needles under my feet were crunchy, and I didn't want to make a sound. I could feel the sweat on my forehead trickling down my temple, and my heart was pounding so loud I was sure it could hear it. The air felt heavy, charged with this tension that made every second stretch out. I kept my eyes glued to the creature, watching as it took a step closer to the trees on my side. Its feet were huge, leaving deep impressions in the mud, and I could see the muscles in its legs flexing with each movement. Just when I thought it was about to spot me, I heard it, a low rumble in the distance. At first, I didn't know what it was, but then I recognized the sound of a truck engine. It was probably on the old logging road about a quarter-mile away, someone driving through. The creature froze instantly. Its whole body went rigid, and its head snapped toward the sound. I could see the tension in its shoulders, like a spring coiled tight. For a second, it just stood there, and then it let out this low grunt, almost like a warning. Before I could even process it, it turned and dashed into the woods on the opposite side of the pond. The movement was so fast it was a blur. It crashed through the underbrush, snapping branches like they were twigs. I heard the crackling sounds echoing through the trees, and then silence fell again, except for the fading engine noise. I stayed put for what felt like ages, too scared to move. My legs were shaking, and I had to lean against the tree to steady myself. The adrenaline was still pumping, making my hands tremble. I kept expecting it to come back, but everything was quiet. The pond was calm again, with just a few ripples where the creature had been. The fish was still on the bank, lying there like some kind of offering. I finally forced myself to take a step forward, my boots squelching in the mud. I walked over to the pond, keeping my eyes darting around, half expecting to see those dark eyes staring back at me. When I got to the water's edge, I saw the evidence. The ground was torn up where the creature had been standing, with deep footprints that were way bigger than any humans. They were at least 1.5 feet long, with a shape that wasn't quite bear or human, more like a mix, with a wide heel and long toes. And there were drag marks nearby, like it had pulled something heavy through the mud. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was real. I hadn't imagined it. I knew I had to tell someone, so I hurried back to the main trail and headed toward the pond owner's place. He's this older guy who maintains the area, and I've talked to him a few times. When I found him, I was still breathless, my words tumbling out in a rush. I said, "I saw something out there, something big and hairy, by the pond." He gave me this skeptical look at first, but when I described what happened, his expression changed. We went back together, and he saw the footprints and drag marks. He shook his head and muttered, "I've heard stories, but I never believed them." We didn't stick around long. The place felt wrong, like we were being watched. I left feeling exposed, like whatever was out there knew I'd seen it. I've never gone back to that spot alone, and I'm always on edge when I'm in those woods now. That thing, whatever it was, left a mark on me that I can't shake. I still don't know what it was, but I know it's out there, and I'll never forget that afternoon. Story 11. Okay, so this happened a few years back, and I still get chills thinking about it. I've never really shared this with anyone outside my family because, well, who'd believe me? But I figure if I'm putting it out here, maybe someone else has been through something similar. It was one of those summer days that starts off perfect and just doesn't end that way. We were camping at Antler Campground on Lake Shasta in California. I remember it was a Friday, the kind of day where the sun is warm but not too hot. And the lake was this gorgeous blue that made everything feel calm. My family had driven up from Redding. My mom, dad, my younger sister who was about 7 at the time, and my cousin who's the same age as me, both of us in our late teens. We'd set up camp the day before, and that morning we decided to have a picnic at this small cove, a little ways from the main dock. It was secluded, with trees crowding the shoreline and this pebbly beach that sloped gently into the water. We spent the morning eating sandwiches and skipping stones, just relaxing. After lunch, around maybe 2 in the afternoon, most of the family headed back to the boat dock to get ready for a late afternoon boat ride. My cousin, my younger sister and I stayed behind to fish for a bit. We had these cheap fishing rods, and the water was so clear you could see little fish darting around near the bottom. My sister was giggling every time she got a nibble, and my cousin was joking around, trying to scare her with stories about lake monsters. It was all fun, you know, normal stuff. We fished for what felt like an hour or so, but the sun was starting to dip lower, and I could feel the air getting cooler. My sister was getting tired, rubbing her eyes and whining a little about wanting to go back. I figured I'd carry her on my shoulders to make it easier. She's small for her age, and the path back to the dock isn't long, but it's uneven and kind of steep in places. So I hoisted her up, and she clung to my hair, which she always does, and we started walking. The path was this narrow dirt trail that wound through the woods, with pine trees on either side and lots of underbrush. It was quiet, except for the crunch of my boots on the gravel and the occasional bird call. My cousin was walking a few steps behind us, humming some song. Then after a minute or two, I started hearing something else. At first, I thought it was just an echo or maybe my own footsteps playing tricks on me. But no. It was footsteps, clear as day, coming from the woods to our right. They matched mine exactly. When I stepped with my left foot, I'd hear a heavy thud from the trees, and when I stepped with my right, another thud. It was like someone or something was pacing us, step for step. I slowed down, thinking maybe it was an animal, a deer or something, but when I stopped, the footsteps stopped too. Dead silence. My sister must have felt me tense up because she asked, "What's wrong?" in this tiny voice. I told her it was nothing, just listening for birds. But my heart was starting to pound. I started walking again, and sure enough, the footsteps picked right back up, keeping pace. My cousin noticed it too. I heard him stop behind me and he whispered, "You hearing that?" I just nodded, not wanting to scare my sister. We kept going, and with every step, the feeling of being watched got stronger. The hairs on my arms were standing up, and I could feel this cold sweat on the back of my neck. The woods were thick here, with shadows stretching between the trees, and I kept glancing over, trying to see something, anything. But it was all just dark shapes and movement in the corner of my eye, like something was flitting between the trees, staying just out of sight. Finally, we reached the dock area. It was a relief to see the boats bobbing in the water and hear people talking. I set my sister down, and she ran off to my mum, who was setting up snacks on a picnic table. I turned to my cousin, and we just looked at each other. He was pale, and I know I was too. I told him I was going back to grab the fishing gear we'd left at the cove. We'd forgotten it in the rush. He offered to come with me, but I said no, it'd be quick, and I wanted to check out what that noise was. Stupid, I know, but curiosity was getting the better of me. So I headed back alone. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows, and the woods felt darker, more closed in. I walked fast, my boots scuffing the dirt, and almost immediately the footsteps started again. But this time they were closer, like right on the edge of the trail. And they weren't just matching mine. They were heavier, more deliberate. I could hear twigs snapping and leaves rustling, like whatever it was didn't care about being quiet anymore. I stopped dead in my tracks, and again, the sound stopped. My breath was coming in shallow puffs, and I could feel my hands shaking. I peered into the trees, squinting, and that's when I saw it, a shift in the shadows, something big moving behind a thicket. It wasn't a deer. Deer don't move like that. It was upright, tall, and it seemed to be keeping pace with me, but now it was getting bolder. I started walking again, faster this time, almost jogging, and the footsteps sped up too, crunching through the brush like it was right beside me. Then all of a sudden, there was this loud crash, like something big bursting through the undergrowth. I spun around, and it stopped just 5 feet away from me. I froze, completely frozen. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing at first. It was a creature, huge, covered in dark brownish black hair that looked matted and thick. It stood on 2 legs, and it was easily over 7 feet tall, with shoulders that were broad and muscular. Its arms were long, hanging past its waist, and its hands. They were massive, like dinner plates, with fingers that curled slightly. But the worst part was its eyes. They were this red-brown color, like old rust, and they seemed to pierce right through me. Not angry, not friendly, just intense, like it was studying me. I could see its chest moving as it breathed, and there was this smell, like wet dog and earth, thick in the air. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It felt like time had stopped. Somehow, I managed to turn my head slightly and saw my cousin standing a little ways back. He must have followed me after all. I pointed, my arm trembling, and croaked out, "Look!" He did, and he let out this blood-curdling scream that snapped me out of my daze. Without another word, he turned and sprinted for the lake, diving in with a huge splash. I didn't think. I just ran after him, my legs feeling like jelly. I hit the water, clothes and all, and started swimming toward the dock where everyone was. The water was cold, shocking me into moving faster. I glanced back over my shoulder, and the creature was still there, standing at the edge of the trees, watching us. It didn't make a sound, just stood there, those red-brown eyes fixed on me. Then, as if it heard something we didn't, its head jerked to the side, and it turned. In one fluid motion, it ran up this steep, brush-covered hillside next to the trail. The incline had to be at least 40 to 45% straight up, covered in loose dirt and shrubs, but it moved like it was nothing. Effortless, powerful strides. It covered what had to be hundreds of feet in just seconds, disappearing into the trees like it was never there. I kept swimming until I reached the dock, and my cousin and I hauled ourselves out, dripping and shaking. People were staring, asking what happened, but we could barely get the words out. Later that evening, we talked to some folks from a cabin nearby, and they said, yeah, Bigfoot occasionally visited the area, that they'd heard stories and even seen tracks. Hearing that just confirmed everything, and I've never felt so unsettled in my life. To this day, I can't explain it. I don't know what it was, but I know what I saw, and I know how it felt. The fear, the disbelief, the way my body locked up. Sometimes I still dream about those eyes, and I wake up sweating. I guess some things just stick with you, no matter how much you try to forget. A distant story 12. All right, I've been sitting on this for a while, but I need to get it out. I don't expect anyone to believe me, and honestly, I don't really care if you do. I just have to tell someone, because it's been eating at me for weeks now. I can't sleep right. I jump at every little sound outside, and I keep all the lights on after dark. My hands are still a little shaky just thinking about it, so bear with me if I ramble. It all started on a Friday, late in the afternoon. I'd been down at the creek, about 1.5 miles from my place, trying my luck with the bass. It was one of those humid, heavy Alabama days where the air feels like a wet blanket. The kind of day where you're sweating just from sitting still. I'd been out since around 2 in the afternoon, but the fish weren't biting, so I packed it in a little early. Must have been about 5 o'clock. The walk home is through a mix of pine forest and thick underbrush, following a dirt path that's mostly used by me and the occasional four-wheeler. I had my fishing rod over my shoulder, my tackle box in my other hand, and I was just trudging along, thinking about nothing in particular. Maybe what I was gonna have for dinner, or whether I should mow the lawn tomorrow. And then, out of nowhere, it hit me. This feeling. It's hard to describe if you've never felt it. It wasn't just a feeling of being alone in the woods. I've been alone in these woods 1,000 times. This was different. It was a deep, primal sensation, like a cold weight in my gut. The hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood straight up. I stopped walking. My heart, which had been beating slow and lazy from the heat, suddenly started thumping hard against my ribs. I stood there for a minute, completely still, listening. The woods had gone quiet. I mean, dead quiet. A few seconds before, I could hear birds chirping, squirrels chattering, the usual background noise of the forest. Now it was just the sound of my own breathing and the blood pounding in my ears. That's the first sign, you know? When the woods go silent, something's there that shouldn't be. I scanned the trees, turning in a slow circle. The sun was getting low, casting long, deep shadows through the pines. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every stump looked like a crouching figure. I told myself I was being stupid, that it was just a deer or maybe a coyote. But I've seen deer and coyotes my whole life. This felt bigger. I started walking again, but faster now. I didn't run. Something in my gut told me not to run. But I power walked, my boots scuffing on the dirt path. I kept glancing over my shoulder, my head on a swivel. That feeling of being watched never went away. It was like a physical pressure on the back of my skull. I didn't see anything. Not then. But I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that something was in those trees, keeping pace with me just out of sight. I finally broke through the tree line and saw my trailer. I've never been so happy to see that rusty old thing in my life. I practically ran the last 50 yards, my lungs burning. I fumbled with the key, my hands slippery with sweat, and finally got the door unlocked. I slammed it shut behind me and threw the deadbolt, leaning against the door, trying to catch my breath. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was just the creeps. I'd been listening to too many true crime podcasts or something. I put my fishing gear away, cracked open a beer, and tried to forget about it. For a couple of days, I almost did. Then, a few nights later, we had a hell of a thunderstorm, the kind that shakes the windows and lights up the whole sky. I was in the living room, watching the weather report on TV, when I heard it. It wasn't thunder, it was a scream, a high-pitched, piercing shriek that cut right through the boom of the storm. It was close, too close. It sounded like it was right outside the bedroom window. It wasn't an animal sound I recognized. It wasn't a bobcat or a fox. Those sounds are scary, but you know what they are. This was alien. It was a scream of pure, raw power, and it made my blood run cold. It lasted for maybe 3 or 4 seconds, and then it was gone, swallowed up by the next roll of thunder. I sat there on the couch, frozen, my beer halfway to my mouth. My spouse was in the other room and called out, "What the hell was that?" I just said, "Lightning hit close by," but I knew it wasn't. I knew it was the same thing from the woods. The next part happened maybe an hour after that scream. The storm had calmed down to a steady rain. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when I saw movement outside the window above the sink. This window looks out onto the back steps and the small concrete slab we have out there. Something walked past the window. It was so fast and the night was so dark, but the motion caught my eye. My kitchen light was on, casting a weak yellow glow onto the steps outside. For a split second, the window went completely black. Not like a shadow, but like a solid black shape had moved right in front of it, blocking out the light from the kitchen. It was so tall that it blacked out the entire window, top to bottom. My heart just about stopped. I stood there, gripping the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. I couldn't move. I just stared at the window, and then it came back. It must have taken a step back because its face was there, looking in at me through the glass. I only saw it for a second, but it's burned into my brain forever. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person in a suit. It was a face, but all wrong. It was covered in short black hair, but the skin around its eyes and mouth was darker, almost like leather. Its eyes. They weren't reflective like an animal's. They were deep-set and intelligent. It didn't snarl or growl. It just looked at me. There was a curiosity in its gaze, but also a kind of ancient, cold intensity. It felt like it was looking right through me, into my soul. Then it was gone, just turned its head and moved away, back into the darkness. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like an hour, but it was probably only 10 seconds. Adrenaline finally kicked in. A surge of pure electric fear shot through me. I ran to the bedroom where we keep the guns safe. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely punch in the code. I got my shotgun out, loaded it with buckshot, and racked a shell into the chamber. The sound was loud and solid in the quiet trailer. I went to the back door, unlocked it, and stepped out onto the steps. The rain was still falling, a fine, cold mist. I flipped on the porch light, but it's a weak bulb and only illuminated a small circle. Beyond that, it was just a wall of blackness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Is someone out there?" Nothing. Just the drip-drip of water from the roof and the distant rumble of thunder. I shone the flashlight I'd grabbed from the kitchen around the yard. The beam cut through the darkness, dancing over wet grass, the trash cans, the trees at the edge of the property. I saw nothing, no movement, no eyes reflecting back at me. I walked all the way around the trailer, my shotgun held tight against my shoulder, my finger resting beside the trigger. Every shadow made me jump. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a footstep. There was nothing. No sign that anything had ever been there. No tracks in the mud around the steps. The concrete was dry under the overhang. It was like it had never happened. But I knew what I saw. That face in the window was real. I went back inside, locked the door, and spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room with the lights on and the shotgun across my lap. I didn't sleep a wink. The next morning, my spouse was making coffee and said, "Oh, by the way, my friend stopped by last night during the storm, said they saw you in the kitchen and didn't want to bother you." My blood went cold. "What friend?" I asked. They gave me a name, someone who lives a few towns over. I know this person. They're about 5.5 feet tall, and they drive a beat-up sedan. "What were they driving?" I asked, my mouth dry. "Their car. Why?" I just shook my head. The thing I saw outside the window was at least 7 feet tall. It was massive, broad-shouldered, and it moved with a powerful, fluid grace that no person could mimic. And it didn't arrive in a car. It was just there. After my spouse left for work, the feeling of dread was still sitting in my stomach like a rock. I had to look. I had to know. I went back outside into the cold morning light. The storm had washed everything clean. I walked around the back of the trailer again, this time looking closer, not for the creature, but for a sign, and then I saw it. There's a spot near the corner of the property where the grass is thin and the ground is just dusty, dry dirt, and right there, pressed deep into the earth, was a footprint. It wasn't a bear print. I've seen plenty of those. Bears have 5 toes. This had 3 long, thick toes and a wide, flat ball at the front. The whole thing was huge. I ran back inside and got a tape measure. From the back of the heel to the tip of the middle toe, it was 12.5 inches long. My own foot is a size 10, and my boot print looked like a child's next to it. The impression was deep, like whatever made it was incredibly heavy. I just stood there staring at it, my mind reeling. This was proof, solid physical proof that I wasn't crazy. A couple of days later, I was back at work. I worked with a small crew doing land surveying. We were out on a job near my place, actually, in a wooded area that borders a few properties. I hadn't told anyone what happened. I didn't know how. But that day, I ended up having to. We were packing up the equipment around late afternoon. Me and 2 other guys, let's call them Dave and Mike. We were just shooting the breeze, loading the truck, when we heard a commotion in the woods. A pack of dogs from one of the nearby farms started barking like crazy, the frantic, scared kind of barking. Then we heard them running, crashing through the underbrush. We all turned to look, and then we saw the dogs burst out of the tree line about 100 yards away, running flat out, and right behind them was it. It was the same thing I'd seen, tall, maybe 7 feet, covered in solid black hair that looked almost like thick fur. It was running on 2 legs, and it was fast, unbelievably fast. It moved with a powerful, ground-eating stride that was somehow both clumsy-looking and incredibly efficient. It wasn't chasing the dogs to play, it was herding them, driving them away. One of the dogs, a brave or stupid hound, turned and tried to snap at it. The creature didn't even break stride. It reached down, snatched a fallen branch from the ground, a thick piece of oak about as big around as my forearm, and in one smooth, terrifying motion, it swung it and smashed it against the trunk of a huge pine tree. The sound was like a gunshot, a loud, sharp crack that echoed through the woods. The branch didn't just break, it exploded into splinters. The dog yelped and scrambled away, tail between its legs, and the whole pack vanished back into the forest. The creature stopped. It stood there, its chest heaving. It dropped the shattered stump of the branch, and then it turned its head. It looked right at us. We were frozen, all 3 of us, just standing by the truck, staring. It was too far away to see its face clearly, but I could feel its gaze. The same feeling from the woods, from my window, 1,000 times stronger. And then it started walking towards us. It didn't run. It just started walking. A slow, deliberate, confident walk. It was covering ground way faster than it should have. with that casual pace. My brain was screaming. Dave whispered, "Oh my God." And it was the most terrified whisper I've ever heard. Mike was the first one to snap out of it. "Get in the truck," he yelled. We didn't need telling twice. We scrambled for the cab. I was in the passenger seat, and I couldn't take my eyes off it. It was still coming. It was maybe 40 yards away now and closing. I could see its size better, the sheer bulk of it, the way its muscles moved under that dark hair. It wasn't making a sound. No growl, no roar, just silent, relentless movement. Dave fumbled with the keys, got the engine started, and threw it into reverse. He slammed on the gas, and the truck lurched backwards down the dirt track, spewing gravel. I was staring out the back window, watching the creature. It had stopped walking. It just stood there in the middle of the clearing, watching us flee. It didn't chase. It just watched. We didn't stop until we were back on the paved road a mile away. We were all breathing hard, nobody saying a word. We just looked at each other, and I knew they had seen it too. I wasn't alone in this anymore. We never talked about it again after that day. What would we say? I've turned it over and over in my head. It never acted aggressively towards me, not directly. It didn't try to break into my trailer. It didn't charge us, even though it could have easily caught us if it ran. It just watched. It made its presence known. It showed its power by shattering that tree. It felt more like a warning, a message to stay away. But that doesn't make it any less terrifying, knowing something that powerful, that intelligent, and that completely unknown is living in the woods around my home, that it knows where I live, that it looked me in the eyes through my own window. The fear isn't the kind that goes away. It's settled deep inside me. It's in the way I triple-check the locks at night. It's in the way I hesitate before stepping outside to take the trash out after dark. It's in that 12.5-inch, three-toed footprint, a photo of which is now saved on my phone, a permanent record of something that shouldn't exist, but does. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it's here. I just know that I saw it, it saw me, and nothing feels safe anymore. Story 13. Okay, so I've never really posted anything like this before, but I need to get this out there because it's been eating at me for weeks now. I'm still shaking just thinking about it, and I don't care if people believe me or not. I know what I saw, and I'll never forget it. This happened in Adams County, Ohio, out in the sticks where my family has some land. It's mostly woods and old farmland, the kind of place where you can go hours without seeing another soul. And that day I was out riding my ATV with my little cousin, who's just 4 years old. I remember it was a Saturday afternoon, around 2 o'clock, and the sun was high but not too hot for early fall. The leaves were starting to turn, so the woods had that mix of green and gold, and the air smelled like damp earth and pine. I'd taken my cousin out because he loves riding on the ATV. He sits in front of me, tucked between my arms, and he giggles every time we hit a bump. That day, we were cruising up this old cattle road that cuts through the back part of the property. It's not much of a road anymore, just a dirt track that's grown over in spots, with ruts and rocks that make the ATV bounce around. I've ridden it 100 times, so I know it like the back of my hand, but that day felt different from the start. The ATV is an older model, a Honda 4-Trax that's seen better days, but it's reliable. I had it in low gear, crawling up the incline because the road gets steep in places. My cousin was chattering away about some cartoon he'd watched, and I was half listening, just enjoying the ride. The engine was humming and the tires were crunching over gravel and leaves. Everything was normal, you know, peaceful even. I remember thinking how quiet it was, too quiet, like the birds had stopped singing or something. But I brushed it off. Sometimes wildlife gets spooked by the ATV. We were about halfway up the hill when I first heard it, a loud thumping sound behind us. At first, I thought it was just the ATV acting up, maybe a loose part or something, but it was too rhythmic, too heavy, thump, 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 like someone hitting the ground with a sledgehammer. I glanced over my shoulder, thinking maybe a deer was running nearby, but what I saw made my blood run cold. There, maybe 50 yards back, was this massive thing. Tall, like way taller than any person I've ever seen. I'd guess it was 10 feet tall, easy. It was covered in brown hair, kind of matted and shaggy, and it looked like a man, but not quite. The proportions were off, like its arms were too long, and it moved in a loping, powerful way. The worst part was that it was carrying a log, a small one, maybe the size of a baseball bat, but thick and rough. It was chasing us, and it was fast. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I've never felt fear like that. It was like ice water pouring down my spine. I tightened my grip on the handlebars and yelled at my cousin to hold on, but he was too little to understand what was happening. He just looked back at me with wide eyes, confused. I didn't have time to explain. I just slammed the throttle forward, and the ATV lurched ahead. The engine roared and we started picking up speed, but that thing was gaining on us. The cattle road was rough, with roots and rocks sticking out, so I had to focus on not flipping us over. Every bump jolted through me, and I could feel the vibration in my hands and legs. My cousin started crying, a little whimper at first, then full-on sobs, and I kept shouting, "It's okay, buddy, just hold on." But I didn't believe it myself. I could hear the thumping getting louder, closer, and when I risked another look back, the creature was only about 30 yards away now. Its eyes, I swear I saw its eyes, dark and focused, like it was zeroed in on us. The hair on its body was swaying with each stride, and it held that log like it was nothing, like it was just a stick. We reached the top of the hill where the road opens into a grassy area, a small clearing maybe the size of a football field, with tall weeds and a few scattered trees. This was my chance to really gun it, so I shifted into a higher gear and pushed the ATV as fast as it would go. The speedometer read around 30 miles per hour, which felt insanely fast on that terrain. The wind whipped past us, and the engine screamed, but I could still hear that thumping right behind us. It was like the creature was matching our speed. No, outpacing us. How could something that big move so fast? It didn't make sense. I glanced back again, and this time it was so close I could see the muscles in its legs bunching up as it ran. It was maybe 20 feet away, and it raised that log over its head. My brain didn't even process what was happening at first. I just saw the motion, and then it threw the log. It wasn't a weak toss. It was a powerful overhand throw, like a pitcher hurling a fastball. The log sailed through the air, spinning, and it landed with a thud just a few feet to our left. I felt the impact through the ground, a dull vibration that shook the ATV, and dirt and grass sprayed up around it. That's when sheer terror took over. I mean, I was already scared, but now I was panicking, thinking that thing could have hit us, could have killed us. My hands were sweating so bad I could barely hold onto the handles, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and fast, and my cousin was screaming now, clinging to me. I didn't look back again. I just focused on getting the hell out of there. I veered to the right, away from where the log landed, and headed for the tree line on the other side of the clearing. The ATV bounced over a dip, and for a second I thought we were going to tip, but I managed to keep it upright. The creature let out this sound, not a roar, but a deep, guttural grunt that echoed through the woods. It sent chills down my back, and I swear I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I didn't stop, didn't slow down. I just kept going, pushing the ATV through the trees and back onto a narrower path that leads down to the main road. The whole time, I expected to feel something grab us from behind, but after a minute or two, the thumping faded, and when I finally dared to look back, there was nothing there. No creature, no log, just the empty clearing behind us. We didn't stop until we reached the paved road a half-mile away. I pulled over, my hands shaking so bad I could barely turn off the engine. My cousin was still crying, and I hugged him tight, telling him it was over, but I didn't know if it was. I sat there for what felt like forever, just trying to catch my breath. The sun was lower in the sky now, casting long shadows, and the woods looked darker, menacing. I kept scanning the tree line, expecting to see that thing emerge, but nothing happened. After a while, I started the ATV again and drove us slowly back to the house, my eyes darting everywhere. When we got home, I didn't tell anyone right away. What would I say? That a giant, hairy monster chased us and threw a log. They'd think I was crazy. I just helped my cousin inside and tried to act normal, but inside I was a wreck. That night, I barely slept. Every noise made me jump, and I kept replaying it in my head. The next morning I had to go back. I don't know why. Maybe to prove to myself it was real, or to see if there was any evidence. I drove out there alone, in my truck this time, and walked up that cattle road. The clearing was just how I left it, quiet and peaceful. But when I got to where the log had landed, it was gone. No sign of it, not even a dent in the grass or broken twigs. I searched the area for footprints or anything, but the ground was hard and dry, and there was nothing. It was like it never happened. But I know it did. I stood there for a long time, feeling this cold dread settle in my gut. Whatever that thing was, it was real, and it's still out there in those Ohio woodlands. To this day, I can't explain it, and I'll never ride that ATV up there again. Story 14. We'd planned this climb for weeks. It was supposed to be a straightforward day hike, nothing too crazy. Early spring, so there was still a lot of snow, but the weather forecast looked decent, cold but clear. I remember waking up around 4 in the morning, my breath fogging in the dim light of the car as we geared up at the snow park. There were 7 of us total, all experienced climbers, friends of friends mostly. We didn't use names much back then. It was just hey you or man or whatever. We were all bundled up in layers, with crampons strapped to our boots and ice axes in hand. The air was sharp and clean, the kind of cold that bites at your exposed skin but makes you feel alive. As we started hiking, the sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, casting a pale grey glow over everything. The snow crunched under our feet, and the only sounds were our breathing and the occasional scrape of gear. We'd been climbing for a couple of hours, moving at a steady pace. The Swift Creek route is pretty gradual at first, but it gets steeper as you go. By around 7:30 in the morning, we were at about 4,000 feet elevation. The sun was up by then, but it was still low, throwing long shadows across the snow. The wind was blowing from the east, strong enough to make my eyes water if I didn't keep my head down. Visibility was amazing, crystal clear, with the white snow and dark rocks standing out sharply. To our east, there was this ridge, maybe 100 yards away, covered in snow with a few scattered trees and boulders. It wasn't dense forest or anything. You could see pretty well between the trees. We were all in a good mood, joking around, feeling the burn in our legs, but enjoying the climb. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, this sound ripped through the air. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. Not a human scream, not an animal I could recognize. It was piercing, almost metallic, but with a raw, guttural edge that made my stomach drop. It came from that ridge to the east, and because of the wind, it carried perfectly, like it was right next to us. I remember freezing mid-step, my boot sinking into the snow as I stopped dead. Everyone else did the same. For a second, no one moved or spoke. We just stood there listening, our breaths puffing out in little clouds. The sound lasted maybe 3 or 4 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. It was high-pitched but not shrill, more like a deep roar forced into a scream, if that makes any sense. It didn't fade away, it just cut off abruptly, leaving this eerie silence that was almost worse. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, and my hands were suddenly clammy inside my gloves. One of the guys, the one leading the group, muttered, "What the hell was that?" His voice was shaky, and I could see the confusion on his face. We all looked at each other, then back at the ridge. Nothing moved, no birds flew up, no branches shook, just stillness. I tried to laugh it off because that's what I do when I'm scared. I said something like, "Maybe it's Bigfoot," and a couple of people chuckled, but it was nervous laughter, hollow. No one really found it funny. We kept staring at that ridge, expecting to see something, a bear, a cougar, anything that could make a noise like that, but there was nothing. The trees were just standing there, the rocks were silent, and the snow looked untouched. That's what got to me the most. The fact that we couldn't see anything. If there had been movement, maybe it would have been less terrifying, but the emptiness made it feel like whatever made that sound was hiding, watching us. We stood there for what felt like 5 minutes, but it was probably less. No one wanted to move first. I remember the cold seeping through my boots and the wind whipping around us, but I barely felt it. My mind was racing, trying to place the sound. I've spent a lot of time in the woods, hunting, hiking, camping, and I've heard coyotes, elk, bears, even mountain lions. This was different. It wasn't just loud. It had this primal quality that set every nerve on edge. One of the women in the group, she was usually tough as nails, but her eyes were wide and she kept gripping her ice axe like she was ready to swing it. "We should keep moving," she said, her voice low and tight. So we did, but the mood had shifted completely. We started climbing again, but now we were quiet, listening for any other sounds. Every little noise, the crunch of snow, the rustle of a jacket, made me jump. I kept glancing over my shoulder at that ridge, half expecting to see something emerge from the trees, but nothing did. The sun climbed higher, and the day warmed up a bit, but I couldn't shake the chill that had settled deep in my bones. We didn't talk much after that. When we did, it was in hushed tones, like we were afraid of drawing attention. As we gained elevation, the terrain got steeper, and we had to focus more on the climb. But my mind kept drifting back to that scream. I replayed it over and over, trying to match it to something I knew. Was it a bird? No, too powerful. A large animal in distress? Maybe. But it didn't sound pained. It sounded aggressive, almost territorial. I thought about how clear it was, carried by the wind, and how it seemed to come from one spot but filled the whole valley. It was like the sound was meant to be heard, to warn us or something. We took a break around 9 in the morning, sitting on a rocky outcrop to drink some water and eat snacks. No one mentioned the scream directly at first, but eventually someone brought it up. "Did anyone get a recording?" one guy asked, but no one had. We all just shook our heads. Another person said they'd heard something similar once in the Cascades but couldn't place it. That's when I brought up Bigfoot again, more seriously this time. I've always been a skeptic about that stuff. I thought it was just folklore, stories to scare kids around campfires. But in that moment, with the memory of that scream fresh in my mind, it didn't seem so far-fetched. Someone else laughed it off, saying it was probably just a weird echo or a rock slide, but we all knew that wasn't it. The sound was too organic, too alive. We finished our break and kept climbing, but the fear never really left. Every shadow seemed darker. Every rustle in the trees felt ominous. I found myself scanning the slopes more carefully, looking for any sign of movement. At one point I thought I saw something dark moving between the trees on the ridge, but it was probably just a trick of the light or my imagination. Still, my pulse quickened, and I had to force myself to breathe slowly. The physical sensations were intense. My muscles were tense, my throat felt dry, and I kept clenching my fists without realizing it. It was like my body was on high alert, ready for a fight or flight that never came. We reached our turnaround point later that morning, around 10:30, but we didn't stay long. The summit was still a ways off, and with the weird vibe, no one was in the mood to push higher. We took a few photos, but they felt pointless. The landscape was beautiful. Snow-covered peaks, blue sky, the kind of view that usually fills me with awe. But that day it just felt empty and menacing. As we started descending, I couldn't help but feel relieved to be going down, but also anxious about passing that ridge again. On the way back, we stayed close together, not saying much. The sun was higher now, and the snow was getting softer, making the descent tricky in spots. I kept my ice axe ready, not just for the climb, but out of some irrational fear. Every time the wind picked up, I'd tense up, half expecting to hear that scream again. But it never came. The rest of the hike was uneventful, just the steady crunch of snow and the occasional call of a bird. By the time we got back to the snow park in the early afternoon, I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. We packed up our gear quickly, everyone eager to get in their cars and leave. There were a few awkward goodbyes, but no one wanted to talk about what happened. It was like if we didn't mention it, it might not be real. I drove home in a daze, the sound still echoing in my head. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed going over every detail, trying to make sense of it. A few days later, I remembered hearing about that Bigfoot scream recording from the 70s, the one from Snohomish in 1978. I looked it up online, and when I found it and played it, my blood ran cold. It was an exact match. The same pitch, the same duration, the same raw intensity. I must have listened to it a dozen times, and each time it brought back that moment on the mountain with terrifying clarity. That's why I'm writing this now. I've never been able to explain what we heard that day. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a cougar, wasn't the wind. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist, but does. I've spent years reading accounts, talking to other hikers, and I've come to believe in Sasquatch, as crazy as that sounds. That solitary scream on the slopes of Mount St. Helens was a chilling reminder that the wilderness holds secrets we can't even imagine. Even now, when I'm out in the woods, I sometimes stop and listen, half hoping and half fearing I'll hear it again. But I never have, and part of me is glad. Because whatever made that sound, I don't ever want to meet it face to face. Story 15. So we went camping. Me, my girlfriend, I'll just call her that, it's easier, and her two kids, a boy and a girl, around 8 and 10. We drove out to the mountains near Greenwater, Washington. It was her idea. She loved the outdoors, wanted the kids to experience it. I was more of a city guy. But I was trying, you know, trying to be a good guy, the kind of guy who could handle a camping trip. We found a spot off this Forest Service road, not too far in, but far enough that you felt isolated. The air was cold and clean, smelled like pine and damp earth. We set up the tent, got a fire going, cooked hot dogs. It was a good day. The kids were laughing. We were all wrapped in blankets as the sun went down. I remember feeling pretty good about the whole thing, like I'd cracked some code to a happy life. We went to bed early, tired from the drive and the fresh air. The four of us in this big family-sized tent. It was cramped but warm. I fell asleep pretty quick, the kind of deep sleep you only get when you're exhausted and the air is cold on your face. Then it happened. It must have been around 1 in the morning. The sound was what woke me. Not a gentle rustle, not the scurry of a raccoon. This was a crash, a proper violent snapping crash, like someone had taken a sledgehammer to a tree trunk. I was awake instantly, my heart already starting to thump in my chest. Next to me, my girlfriend stirred. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice thick with sleep. "I don't know," I said, keeping my voice low. "An elk, maybe. Or a bear." We lay there in the dark, not moving, just listening. The kids were still asleep, thank God. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. It was a heavy, waiting silence. You could feel the forest holding its breath. Then, another crash, a little further away this time. It sounded big, really big. The kind of big that makes you feel very, very small inside a thin nylon tent. We listened for a few more minutes, but it seemed to have moved off. The normal night sound started to trickle back in, the faint whisper of the wind, a distant owl. My breathing started to slow down. "Probably just an elk," I said again, more to convince myself than her. "They're clumsy bastards in the dark." She mumbled something and settled back into her sleeping bag. I tried to do the same. telling myself it was nothing, but that feeling, that primal knot in my gut, wouldn't go away. I was on edge, every nerve feeling exposed. I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, I was awake again. This time, it wasn't a crash that woke me. It was a sound I cannot to this day properly describe, and I've tried. I've listened to every wildlife sound clip online, every weird audio file. Nothing comes close. It started as a low grunt, deep and guttural, like the worst chest cold you've ever heard, but 100 times louder. It wasn't far away. It was right there, maybe 30, 40 feet from the tent. Then it shifted into this groaning sound, like old wood straining, mixed with a wet horse snort. A horse-like snort, but wrong. It was too intelligent, too full of something. Not malice exactly, more like curiosity. A predatory curiosity. The kids were awake now. The little girl started to cry, a quiet, scared whimper. Her brother was just frozen, his eyes wide in the dark. My girlfriend clutched my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "What is that?" she hissed, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I said. And this time I really didn't know. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't an elk. It wasn't anything from any nature documentary I'd ever seen. The sounds kept coming. Grunts, groans, another one of those wet, powerful snorts. It was pacing. I could hear the heavy, deliberate thump, thump, thump of its footsteps circling our camp. It was testing us. The smell hit me then, seeping through the tent fabric. It was a wave of pure rot, like a mix of a dead animal left in the sun and old, wet fur. It was so thick and foul, it made my eyes water and my stomach turn. "You have to go out there," my girlfriend whispered, her face pale in the faint moonlight coming through the tent mesh. "What, are you crazy?" I said, my own voice a shaky whisper. "It's going to come in here. It's going to get the kids. You have to scare it off." The fear in her voice was absolute. It was a mother's fear, raw and powerful, and it overrode my own terror for a second. She was right. We were sitting ducks in this tent. I had a gun, a .40 caliber Glock I'd brought just in case. It felt like a toy in that moment. "Okay," I said, the word tasting like ash. "Okay." I fumbled for my jeans, pulling them on with clumsy hands. I grabbed the Glock and my big spotlight, the one we used for spotting deer eyes. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely click the safety off. I took a deep breath, which was a mistake because all I got was a lungful of that god-awful stench. "Be careful," she said, handing me the shotgun. It was a 12-gauge pump action. I'd only ever shot it at clay pigeons. She'd brought it from her ex's place. She was the outdoorsy one, remember? I was just the city guy trying to impress her. I looked at the shotgun, then at the spotlight. My brain, fuzzy with fear, came up with a stupid, desperate idea. I found the roll of duct tape we'd used to fix a torn tent pole earlier. With trembling fingers, I started wrapping tape around the barrel of the shotgun and the handle of the spotlight, binding them together into this clumsy, heavy weapon. It was lopsided and awkward, but it meant I could hold both with one hand and have my other free for the pistol or for the pump action. I didn't have a plan. I was just operating on pure, terrified instinct. I unzipped the tent flap slowly, the sound impossibly loud in the tent's quiet. The grunting had stopped. The forest was silent again. That was worse. I stepped out into the cold. The air was biting, but I was sweating. I clicked on the spotlight. The beam cut through the darkness, a stark white lance that illuminated the trees in a surreal, flat light. It made the shadows behind them even blacker. I started walking, my feet crunching on the pine needles. Every sound I made seemed to scream, "I'm here!" I swept the light back and forth across the tree line. Nothing, just trees and more trees. The smell was stronger out here, clinging to the back of my throat. I took a few more steps away from the tent, towards where I'd last heard the sounds. My heart was a drum solo in my ears. I could feel the kids and my girlfriend watching me from the tent, their fear of physical pressure on my back. I was about 25 feet from the tent now, closer to the wall of dark firs and hemlocks. I stopped, scanning the trees again. The beam of the spotlight danced over the trunks, and then it stopped. There, about 50 feet away, just inside the tree line, were two eyes. They weren't like deer eyes, which shine with a bright, innocent blue or green. These were huge, massive, and they were a deep, glowing reddish orange. They were set wide apart, and they were high up, so high up. I'm 6 feet tall, and whatever these eyes belonged to, it was looking down at me. The light hit them, and they didn't blink. They just stared. There was no reflection, no animal curiosity. It was a flat, intelligent stare, a knowing stare. My blood went cold, I mean literally cold. I felt a chill wash over me that had nothing to do with the mountain air. My breath caught in my chest. I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, locked in that gaze. I could feel its presence. It was a weight, a pressure in the air around me. I couldn't see its body, just the silhouette of something immense and dark behind those eyes, but I could feel its size. It was towering. My mind was screaming, a high-pitched internal wail of pure, undiluted terror. This was it. This was the thing in the dark your ancestors warned you about. Then it roared. It wasn't a sound you hear with your ears. You feel it in your bones, in your teeth. It was a deafening, guttural, earth-shaking bellow that seemed to suck all the air out of the forest. It was rage and power and a challenge all in one. The sound vibrated through the ground, up through my legs, and then it charged. The trees at the edge of the clearing just exploded. This thing, this massive, dark shape, burst out of the tree line and came straight for me. It was fast, unbelievably fast. It wasn't running on all fours like a bear. It was running upright on two legs, with this powerful, loping gait that ate up the distance. It was a blur of matted, dark hair and raw, terrifying muscle. My brain short-circuited, training, logic, everything just vanished. There was only the ancient lizard part of my brain screaming, "Threat!" My body moved on its own. I swung the clumsy spotlight shotgun contraption up, the beam jerking wildly, and I pulled the trigger. Boom! The shotgun kicked like a mule, the sound deafening in the quiet night. I worked the pump action, the sound harsh and metallic. Boom! I fired again. I don't know if I hit it. I was just pointing in its general direction. The thing didn't even slow down. It kept coming, closing the distance in seconds. I dropped the shotgun. It clattered to the ground, the spotlight beam pointing uselessly at the sky. I fumbled for the Glock on my hip, my fingers numb and stupid. I got it out, raised it with both hands, and I just started pulling the trigger. Pop, pop, pop. The reports were pathetic little cracks after the shotgun's roar. I emptied the entire clip, 15 rounds, just firing blindly into the dark shape that was almost on top of me. I saw it then, in the chaotic light from the spotlight on the ground. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. Shoulders like a damn grizzly, and the smell... God, the smell was overwhelming, a physical force of decay and wildness, and then it veered. At the last possible second, just as I was sure I was about to be swatted into paste, it turned. It didn't stop. It just angled its charge and ran right past me, so close I felt the wind of its passage and a shower of pine needles and dirt kicked up by its feet. It was heading downhill, away from the camp. The noise it made as it crashed through the forest was immense. It wasn't trying to be quiet. It was just pure, raw power smashing through undergrowth, snapping branches the size of my arm like twigs. The sound of its passage faded with shocking speed, moving down the mountain with a speed that was just impossible. I stood there, panting, the empty Glock still held out in front of me. The smell was already starting to fade. The forest was silent again, but this was a different silence. It was the silence of shock. My ears were ringing from the gunshots. I could smell the cordite from the pistol, a sharp, clean scent that fought with the lingering rot. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like an hour. It was probably 10 seconds. Then I heard my girlfriend's voice, shrill with panic. "Get in here, now!" I stumbled back to the tent, my legs feeling like rubber. I fell inside, zipping the flap shut behind me. The kids were sobbing. My girlfriend was just staring at me, her face a mask of terror. "What was it?" she asked. I just shook my head. I couldn't speak. My throat was locked shut. I started shivering, a deep, uncontrollable shake that came from my core. "We have to go," she said. "Right now." We didn't speak. We just moved. We packed up the entire campsite in a frantic, silent frenzy. We didn't care about folding things neatly. We just threw the sleeping bags, the tent, the coolers, everything into the back of the SUV. The whole time we were scanning the woods, jumping at every little sound. It was still pitch black, maybe 2 in the morning by then. We got in the car, locked the doors, and I tore out of there, driving way too fast down that dark, winding Forest Service road. Nobody said a word for the first 20 minutes. We just listened to the tires on the gravel and the sound of our own ragged breathing. That was it. That was the encounter. We broke up a few months later. We never really talked about it again after that night. It was like this huge, ugly thing sitting between us that we were both too scared to acknowledge. How do you build a future with someone when you've shared a moment of pure, primordial terror like that? You can't. It changes you. It changed me. I've never gone back to those mountains. I don't even like driving through wooded areas at night. Sometimes I'll see a big shadow in the corner of my eye, and my heart will just stop. I still have dreams about those red-orange eyes staring at me from the dark. I wonder sometimes if I hit it, if there's evidence out there, a skeleton with old shotgun pellets in it. But I know deep down that I didn't even scratch it. I was just making noise. It was letting me make noise, and then it left. I don't know why it charged, and I don't know why it ran away. I'll never know. And that's the part that haunts me the most, the not knowing. The memory of that thing so close I could feel its heat and smell its breath, and the absolute certainty that I was about to die. And then, nothing. Just the sound of it disappearing into the woods, leaving me standing there, shaking and alone. Story 16. It was late summer, one of those humid, sticky Alabama evenings where the air feels thick enough to drink. The sun had just gone down, but the heat hadn't let up, and the crickets and frogs were already going nuts. I was babysitting my girlfriend and her little brother at their house. Their parents were out of town for the night, and I was supposed to be the responsible one, you know? Make sure everything was locked up, keep an eye on things. I remember feeling pretty good about it, like I was old enough to handle whatever came up. We'd been watching some dumb movie in the living room, the 3 of us, with all the lights off except for the TV glow. The little brother, he was maybe 10 or so, had fallen asleep on the couch, and my girlfriend was half dozing too, her head on my shoulder. Everything was quiet, peaceful. I remember thinking how normal it all felt. Then I heard it. It wasn't a knock. It wasn't the wind. It was the front doorknob, the metal one, jiggling. Not like someone was trying to turn it gently, but like they were yanking on it hard and fast, like they were pissed off or something. The sound was violent, like the whole door was going to come off its hinges. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I froze for a second, my whole body going cold despite the heat. My girlfriend sat straight up, her eyes wide, and she whispered, "What was that?" I didn't know. My first thought was, maybe it was one of their parents coming back early. But why would they be jerking the knob like that? And why wouldn't they just use their key? I'd locked the door myself not an hour before, twisting the deadbolt until it clicked. I remember the feel of the cool metal under my thumb. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like jelly, and crept toward the door. The jiggling had stopped, but now there was silence, which was almost worse. I peered through the peephole, but it was dark out there. The porch light wasn't on, and I couldn't see anything, just blackness. That's when the fear really set in. This wasn't a prank. This felt wrong. My hands were shaking. I turned back to my girlfriend and told her we had to go. Now. My parents' house was just down the road, maybe a 5-minute walk if we cut through the back field. It felt like the safest option. We woke up her brother, who was groggy and confused, and I didn't explain much, just said we were going to my house. I unlocked the back door as quietly as I could, my fingers fumbling with the key, and we slipped out into the night. The air outside was even heavier, and the weeds in the backyard were wet with dew, soaking through my sneakers almost immediately. We ran, all three of us not looking back. I could hear our ragged breathing, and the little brother was whimpering a little. Every shadow felt like it was moving. We didn't stop until we burst through my back door into the kitchen, where my mum was washing dishes. She took one look at our faces and knew something was really wrong. We called the police. 2 officers showed up maybe 20 minutes later. I told them what happened, about the doorknob jiggling violently. They were polite, but I could tell they thought we were just spooked kids. They went over to the house, checked the doors and windows, and came back saying everything was locked up tight, no signs of forced entry. Probably just the wind, or an animal, they said. Maybe a raccoon messing with the door. But I knew it wasn't a raccoon. The force of it was too much. After they left, I couldn't just let it go. I felt responsible. I needed to know. My dad had a shotgun, an old 12 gauge he kept for hunting. I'd been taught how to use it, how to handle it safely. I told my parents I was going back to check the property just to make sure. My mum was against it, but my dad, he saw the look in my eyes. He nodded, told me to be careful, and to take the big flashlight from the garage. So I went back alone. The walk back to my girlfriend's house felt 1,000 times longer than the run away from it. The moon was full that night, a huge, bright white disk in the sky that cast sharp, long shadows. It was almost too bright, like a sickly daytime. I had the shotgun broken over my arm, shells in my pocket, and the heavy metal flashlight in my other hand, its beam cutting a shaky path in front of me. Every little sound, a twig snapping, the rustle of leaves, made me jump. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. I got to the house. It was dark and silent. I walked around the side toward the back field. This field wasn't a nice mowed lawn. It was wild, overgrown with weeds and brush that, no joke, were taller than me, and I'm 6 feet tall. They were thick too, like a wall of green. The moonlight made everything look washed out and eerie. I stood at the edge of this field, shining the flashlight beam into the darkness between the stalks. The beam wasn't steady because my hand was shaking so bad. I was scanning slowly, left to right, listening. The crickets had gone quiet. That was the first thing I noticed. The whole world had gone dead silent. No frogs, no bugs, nothing, just the sound of my own breathing. And then I saw it. It was deep in the field, maybe 50, 60 yards away, a figure. It was standing upright, just standing there among the tall weeds. At first, my brain couldn't make sense of the scale. It was massive. I mean, unbelievably huge. I'm not good at estimating. But I'd put it at 7.5 feet tall, easy, and it had to weigh 500 pounds, but it wasn't fat. It was all muscle, like a professional wrestler or something, but even bigger, with a build that just didn't look human. The proportions were wrong. The shoulders were way too broad. The arms were long and thick, hanging down past its knees. The color is what got me, though. It wasn't brown or black like you see in pictures. It was this weird, dirty, off-white color, like old parchment or a dirty sheet, and it seemed to almost glow in the moonlight. It was just standing there, perfectly still, facing me. I couldn't see its face clearly from that distance, just a dark shape, but I could feel it looking at me. I could feel its attention on me, like a physical weight. My blood went cold. It was a cold that started in my chest and spread out to my fingers and toes, a deep, paralyzing chill that had nothing to do with the night air. I forgot how to breathe for a second. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand like that. They don't have that kind of posture. This was something else. I raised the flashlight, my arm feeling like it weighed a ton, and I pointed the beam right at it. I wanted to see its face. I needed to see what it was. The second the full light hit it, it was just gone. It didn't run. It didn't duck. It didn't make a sound. 1 second it was there, this giant pale thing filling up my vision, and the next second, the space where it had been was just empty, just swaying weeds and moonlight. I stood there, frozen, the beam of light fixed on that one spot, my finger on the trigger of the shotgun. I didn't even realize I'd raised it. I was panting, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I felt like I was going to be sick. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe a minute, maybe 5. Eventually, some kind of survival instinct kicked in, and I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off that spot until I felt the corner of the house behind me. Then I turned and ran. I ran all the way back to my parents' house, the shotgun banging against my side, not caring about the noise I was making. The next morning, when the sun was up and the world felt sane again, I went back with my dad. I had to show him. We walked to the edge of the field, and there, right where I'd seen the thing, was a perfect circle of weeds, all smashed down flat. The stalks were broken, not cut, pressed into the ground like something incredibly heavy had been standing there. The circle was big, bigger than any person could make. My dad looked at it, looked at me, and just shook his head. He didn't say it was my imagination. He couldn't. The police had dismissed it, but I knew, and that wasn't the end of it. Over the next few months, I saw it again. Not up close, thank God, but I saw it. Once, down near Von Hollow, I was driving home late, and my headlights caught a glimpse of something huge and pale, moving just inside the tree line. Another time, by the Hannah Ward Bridge, I was fishing with a friend, and I looked up and saw it on the opposite bank, just watching us from the shadows. It was too far to see details, but I knew the shape, the size. I knew it was the same thing. The most unsettling time was at Sulphur Creek. I was there alone, just skipping stones, and I got that feeling again, the hair on my arms standing up. I looked across the creek, and there it was, partially hidden by a big sycamore tree. It was just standing there, not moving, just watching me. It never made a threatening move. It never growled or charged. It just observed. It felt like it was studying me. That was somehow worse than if it had been aggressive. The sheer intensity of its focus was terrifying. Every time it was the same, that massive off-white body, that silent, powerful presence. And then it would be gone, vanishing into the woods without a sound. The terror of that first sighting never went away. It just got compounded, layered with each new encounter. It left me forever haunted, not just by the fear, but by the certainty that there is something out there in the woods around the Elk River, something that doesn't fit into any box, something that saw me and for some reason decided to keep watching. I don't know why me. I don't know what it wanted. I just know it was there, and a part of me believes it still is. Story 17. It was July of 1975, and I was 15 years old. I was down in Oakland County, South Carolina, staying with my grandparents for the summer. Their house was old, kind of creaky, and sat on a decent bit of land that backed up into woods that eventually led down to the flooded valley near the Duke power plant. It was always so quiet there, a different kind of quiet from back home. Not peaceful exactly, more like a heavy quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. That whole day had felt off. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because my grandmother had done her big grocery run the day before, and Tuesdays were always just empty. The sky was this pale, washed-out blue, and the heat was the thick, wet kind that stuck to your skin and made your t-shirt feel like a second heavier layer. I'd been cooped up inside all morning, reading old comic books and listening to the floor fans whir. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I told my grandma I was going for a walk down to the lake. She just nodded from her rocking chair on the porch, telling me not to be gone too long and to watch for snakes. The walk started out normal. I followed the dirt path that started at the edge of their property. It was a path I'd taken a dozen times before. The woods were dense, mostly pine with a lot of underbrush, and the air smelled like hot pine needles and that damp, muddy smell you get from a lake. I was just walking, kicking at stones, not thinking about much of anything. The only sounds were my own footsteps crunching on the dry ground and the buzz of insects in the trees. The path eventually started to slope down towards the lake, and that's when the woods got a little more remote. This section was different. The trees were thicker, older, and they blocked out a lot more of the sun. It felt cooler, but not in a refreshing way. It felt closed in. I remember stepping over a fallen log, my sneaker sinking into the soft, rotten wood, and that's when I first saw the footprints. They weren't deer tracks. They were way too big for that. They were pressed deep into the soft, black mud near the water's edge, and they looked almost human, but not right. They were long, with a wide splay at the front like toes, but no discernible arch. Just big. I remember crouching down, my knee getting damp from the ground and just staring at one. I put my own sneaker next to it. My foot was a size 8 back then. This print was easily twice as long and 3 times as wide. A cold little knot started to tighten in my stomach. I stood up quick, looking around, suddenly feeling very alone. I decided to follow the shoreline for a bit, my eyes glued to the ground, tracking those prints. They led away from the main part of the lake, into a cove that was choked with cypress knees and hanging moss. The air was still and silent here. The insect buzzing had stopped. That was the first thing that really registered as wrong. The woods are never completely silent, but here it was. It was like someone had thrown a soundproof blanket over everything. That's when I saw it. It was about 100 yards away on the other side of the cove, walking up a steep, muddy incline from the water. My brain just sort of short-circuited for a second. It was huge, 7, maybe 8 feet tall, and it was a color I've never been able to properly describe. It wasn't brown or black. It was a reddish color, like rust or wet clay. Its hair or fur was long and matted, plastered to its body in some places, and hanging in shaggy clumps in others, like it had just come out of the water. The most unnatural thing about it was that it didn't seem to have a neck. Its massive, blocky head just sat directly on its broad shoulders. I couldn't make out a face from that distance, just a dark patch where a face should be. It was moving up the slope with a powerful, fluid ease that was terrifying. It wasn't scrambling or climbing. It was just walking, its long arms swinging slightly, its legs powering it up the muddy bank like it was nothing. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, and my heart started hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my ears. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, but I was paralyzed. I just stood there, hidden behind a thick pine tree, my fingers digging into the rough bark. I watched it reach the top of the incline and pause for a moment, its head turning slowly, scanning the woods. I swear I felt its gaze sweep right over my hiding spot. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my whole body against the tree, praying it hadn't seen me. When I dared to look again, it was moving again, heading inland, away from the lake. It disappeared into the thicker trees, its reddish form blending into the shadows until I couldn't see it anymore. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My legs were shaking. I needed to get back. Now, I turned and started hurrying back the way I came, my pace quickening with every step. I wasn't running yet, but I was close. I just wanted to get to the main path, to get out of that closed-in, silent part of the woods. I broke out of the thickest part of the trees and onto the wider, more defined path that would eventually lead to the gravel road back to my grandparents' house. The relief was immediate but short-lived. I could hear something, a crashing sound, off to my left, moving parallel to the path. It was keeping pace with me. My walk turned into a jog. The crashing in the woods kept pace. I started to run. The thing burst out of the tree line maybe 50 feet ahead of me. It was the same creature. It must have looped around. It was on the road now, running on two legs, its powerful strides eating up the gravel. It wasn't running at me, it was just running, parallel to me, like we were in some kind of sick, silent race. Its body was a blur of matted red hair and bunched muscle. I could hear its feet pounding on the ground, a heavy, rhythmic thump, thump, thump that was louder than my own frantic footsteps, and then it screamed. I have never, ever heard a sound like that before or since. It wasn't an animal sound I recognized. It was high and shrill, but also guttural and wet, like it was being torn from its throat. The closest thing I can compare it to is the sound of a cow and a pig being slaughtered at the same time, but that doesn't even come close to doing it justice. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and terror, all mixed into one. It was a physical force. The sound hit me in the chest, a piercing wave that made my ears ring and my bones vibrate. It felt like the air itself was shattering. In that instant, every local story I'd ever have heard came screaming back into my head. Screaming hollow booger branch, names I'd thought were just silly jokes, stories old-timers told to scare kids. They weren't jokes. This was the source. This was the thing that made those stories. The scream broke whatever was left of my nerve. Pure animal terror took over. I wasn't thinking, I was just running. I ran like my life depended on it, because in that moment, I truly believed it did. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just pumped my arms and legs, my lungs burning, the taste of copper in my mouth. The gravel of the road skittered under my feet. I could still hear it, the heavy footfalls, and that awful, echoing scream hanging in the air behind me, chasing me. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like forever. My side was cramping, and a stitch in my ribs was like a hot knife. I finally risked a glance over my shoulder. The road was empty. The woods were silent again. I slowed to a stumbling walk, my whole body trembling, sweat pouring down my face and stinging my eyes. I was crying, I realized, sobbing from sheer, gut-wrenching fear. I walked the rest of the way home in a daze. My clothes were soaked with sweat and streaked with dirt. My hands were scraped up from when I'd stumbled at one point. When I finally stumbled up onto my grandparents' porch, my grandma took one look at me and her face went pale. "Good Lord, child, what happened to you?" she asked, her voice tight with alarm. I just shook my head. I couldn't form the words. How do you say you just saw a monster from a ghost story? I mumbled something about tripping and falling and feeling sick from the heat. I went straight to my room and lay down on the bed, still shaking. I could still hear that scream echoing in my head. I could still see its necklace silhouette and that reddish, matted fur. I never went back to that part of the lake again. I stayed close to the house for the rest of the summer, jumping at every little sound at night. I never told my grandparents what I really saw. I knew they wouldn't believe me, or worse, they'd think I was crazy. But I know what I saw. I can still see it clear as day, burned into my memory, that 7 to 8 foot tall necklace thing, the color of rust, walking out of the water, the way it moved. The raw physical power of it, and that sound, that god-awful piercing scream that sounded like death itself. It was real. It was there. And the memory of it, the sheer primal terror of that one afternoon in July, has haunted me every single day since. Story 18. It was one of those weirdly warm days you sometimes get in Tennessee, right before winter really sets in. December 9th. 2000. I remember the date because I wrote it down later, trying to make sense of it all. The air was cool but not cold, maybe 45, 50 degrees. I was wearing a flannel shirt over a t-shirt and I was plenty warm, especially since I was working. I was leasing this old property out near the edge of the county, a nice little spread with a decent barn and some good pasture. My main reason for being there was the horses. I had 2 mares, Daisy and Clover, and I was out by the round pen next to the barn, getting Daisy ready for some groundwork. The sun was already starting to get low in the sky, casting long, deep shadows from the woods that bordered the property on 2 sides. It was around 3:30 in the afternoon. I had Daisy on a lead rope, just asking her to move her hindquarters. Basic stuff. She's usually a pretty focused horse, but she started to get antsy. Her ears, which had been flicking back and forth to my voice, suddenly pinned forward, straight towards the tree line. She stopped moving and just stared, her whole body rigid. I gave the rope a little tug. "Come on, girl, eyes on me," I said, but she wasn't having it. Then Clover, who was loafing in the paddock nearby, let out this sharp, worried whinny and trotted over to the fence line, also staring into the woods. That got my attention. We have coyotes, the occasional black bear, but the horses don't usually get this worked up over them. It's more of a casual interest. This was different. This was a full-on, high-alert kind of stare. So I stopped what I was doing and I looked. At first I thought it was a kid. That was my brain's first logical explanation. It was standing maybe 70, 80 yards away, right at the edge where the winter bear trees started getting thick. It was upright, and I saw what I registered as a heavy grey parka with the hood up. It made sense. It was a chilly afternoon. Maybe some teenager from a neighboring property wandering around where they shouldn't be. But almost immediately, things started to not add up. The way it was standing, it was just still. Not like a person waiting, but like a statue, and it was tall, really tall. I'm 6 feet even, and this thing had to be a solid head and shoulders taller than me, maybe more. The parka looked wrong too. It wasn't the puffy manufactured look of a winter coat. It was a solid matted grey, like the colour of a dirty sheep, and it seemed to hang off its frame. Then it moved. It wasn't a step. It was this slow, swaying motion, like a tree trunk rocking in a wind that wasn't blowing. The whole upper body just tilted to one side, then back to center. It was unnatural. There's no other word for it. A human sways a little if they're shifting their weight, but this was different. This was a slow, deliberate pendulum swing. My eyes were glued to it. The initial, "oh, it's just a person" feeling was evaporating fast, replaced by a cold, creeping confusion. I was squinting, trying to get a better look at its face, but the hood, or what I thought was a hood, was deep and shadowed. That's when I started to see the hair. I'd thought the grey was the coat, but the longer I stared, the more I realized the grey was it. It was covered in this long, shaggy, greyish hair. What I'd taken for a hood was just the way the hair lay on its head and shoulders, thicker and longer there, and the movement kept going, that same slow, rhythmic sway. It didn't look at me. It just faced forward towards the field, swaying. Daisy let out a low, guttural snort and backed up, pulling on the lead rope so hard I almost lost my grip. The air, which had felt mild a minute ago, now felt heavy and cold. I could feel the hairs on my arms standing up under my flannel shirt. My heart wasn't hammering yet, but it had shifted into a heavier, more deliberate beat. Thump, 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 like a drum counting out a warning. My mind was racing, throwing out possibilities and immediately shooting them down. A bear? No. Bears don't stand straight up like that and just sway. They hunch. They move on all fours. This thing was bipedal, completely upright. A person in a fur suit? Out here? At 3:30 on a Saturday afternoon in rural Tennessee? It was absurd. The sheer size of it ruled out any normal person. I must have watched it for a full minute, maybe 2. It felt like an hour. The entire world had shrunk down to this one patch of woods and this grey, swaying figure. The sounds of the farm, the horses breathing, a distant crow, seemed to have faded away, like someone had turned the volume down on everything but the blood rushing in my ears. I remember a very specific, very stupid thought crossing my mind. I thought, I need to get Daisy put up. It was like my brain, unable to process what it was seeing, latched onto the most mundane task it could find. I tore my eyes away from the thing in the woods. I turned my head, just for a second, just to look at Daisy's wide, white-rimmed eyes and see where the gate to the barn was. It couldn't have been more than 3 seconds. I turned my head, looked at my terrified horse, and then I looked back. It was gone, just gone. The spot where it had been standing was empty. No movement, no sound, nothing. My breath caught in my throat. That's not a figure of speech. I actually felt my throat close up. I stared, my eyes scanning the tree line frantically. It hadn't stepped behind a tree. The nearest tree, thick enough to hide something that size, was a good 15 feet to the left. It hadn't ducked down. The underbrush was sparse and brown. I would have seen a grey mass moving through it. It was just no longer there, vanished, like it had never been there at all. That's when the fear hit me, not the confused unease from before, but a raw, primal terror that started in my gut and shot out to my fingertips. It was a cold sweat that broke out all over my body instantly. My mouth went dry, adrenaline dumped into my system so hard, my hands started to shake. I didn't think, I acted. I yanked on Daisy's lead rope and half-dragged, half-led her to the barn. She didn't resist. She was as spooked as I was. I got her into her stall, my movements jerky and frantic. I didn't even bother taking her halter off properly. I just unbuckled it and let it fall. I did the same with Clover, practically pushing her into her stall and slamming the door shut, throwing the heavy bolt. The sound of the metal bolt slamming home was loud and final in the quiet barn. I stood there in the aisle, listening. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. I was straining to hear anything, a footstep, a branch breaking, anything. But there was nothing, just the normal, quiet sounds of the barn, the horses stamping a foot, chewing hay, the soft rustle of their movements. I walked to the small window at the front of the barn, the one that looked out towards the woods. I didn't want to look, but I had to. The field was empty. The tree line was still. The shadows were a little longer, that was all. The spot where it had stood was just a patch of dead grass and leaf litter. I stayed in the barn for a long time. I don't know how long. Long enough for the sun to dip below the tree line and for the inside of the barn to get dark. I kept expecting to see a grey shape appear at the door or for a huge hand to slap against the window. But nothing happened. Eventually, I knew I had to leave. I had to get to my truck, which was parked 50 feet away, and drive home. Those 50 feet felt like a mile. I remember unlocking the barn door and stepping out into the twilight. The air was much colder now. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of a leaf sounded like a footstep. I walked fast, my head on a swivel, my keys already in my hand, poking out between my fingers like a pathetic weapon. I fumbled with the truck door, my hands still shaking, and practically threw myself inside, locking the doors immediately. I sat there for a minute, just breathing, watching the woods in the rearview mirror as I started the engine and got the hell out of there. The terror of that moment, of seeing it and then it disappearing, was bad enough, but the real haunting started later. It was the confusion that ate at me. My brain kept trying to file the experience away, but it didn't fit in any of the normal folders. It wasn't a person, it wasn't a bear. So what was it? A couple days later, I was at my day job, still feeling off. I must have looked it too, because a co-worker asked if I was feeling okay. I didn't plan on saying anything, it sounded so crazy, but it just kind of came out. I kept it vague. I said, I saw something weird out at the property the other day, by the woods. Looked like a really big person, but it wasn't. Another guy, an older fellow who was a big hunter, was listening. He didn't laugh. He got quiet, and then he said, "What color was it?" The question was so specific it threw me. "Gray," I said, "like a light gray." He just nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something he already knew. "There's stories," he said, his voice low. "Hunters have seen things like that for years up in the mountains. They call it the Yeti, or a grassman around here. Most say it's dark brown or black, though." Hearing him say that so seriously didn't make me feel better. It made it worse. It meant I wasn't the only one. It meant this was a thing that other people had seen. This wasn't a one-off hallucination. This was a phenomenon. And the fact that mine was light gray, not dark, just made it weirder, like there was more than one, or it was some kind of variant. It made the whole thing feel more real, and infinitely more terrifying. That was the moment the curiosity got its hooks into me, right alongside the fear. I became obsessed. I started reading everything I could find, which wasn't much back in 2000. I found a few books and some early clunky websites with blurry photos and shaky stories. But the descriptions, the upright stance, the unnatural movement, the ability to just vanish, they matched. They all matched. I never saw it again. I kept leasing that property for another 6 months, but I was never comfortable there again. I was always watching the woods, my skin crawling, a camera now permanently on the passenger seat of my truck, and later, a better one, a digital one, that I started carrying in my pocket whenever I was outside. I was determined. If it ever showed itself again, I would get proof. I would get a picture. I needed to, for my own sanity, to prove to myself that I hadn't lost my mind that afternoon. But I never got the chance. The proof never came. All I'm left with is the memory, burned into my brain as clear as if it happened yesterday. The weirdly warm air, the rigid fear of my horses, the tall grey figure swaying silently at the edge of the trees, and the heart-stopping void it left behind when I looked away. I can't explain it. I can't rationalize it. I just live with it. A cold little knot of mystery and dread that I carry with me every single day, always wondering what it was and why it was there, watching me. Wayne, story 19. All right, I'll just come out and say it. I don't know what I saw that day, and I've been turning it over in my head for years now. It's one of those things you don't talk about because people look at you different, but I need to get it out somewhere. Maybe writing it down will help. Maybe it won't. But here it is. My name is Doyle Holmes, and this happened to me on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. I remember the date because it was the last real warm day before the cold set in for good, and I'd taken the day off work to get out to Carter Lake. It's this little-known spot on the southern tip of Mercer Bayou, a place I've been fishing since I was a kid. It's not an easy place to get to, which is why I like it. You have to take a dirt road for about 20 minutes off the main highway, a road that's more pothole than gravel, and then you park at this little pull-off that's basically just a widening in the path. From there, it's a 5-minute walk through thick woods down to the water's edge. Nobody goes out there. That's the whole point. I got there around 11 in the morning. The air was still cool, but the sun was strong, and you could tell it was going to be a hot one. I remember the smell, that damp, earthy smell of the bayou, mixed with the faint rot of dead leaves. I hauled my gear down to my usual spot, a flat, muddy bank right where the lake curves around a thicket of cypress trees. The water was dark, almost black and perfectly still. It was quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat. I set up my folding stool, got my rod ready, and just settled in. For the first couple of hours it was perfect. Just me, the water, and the occasional plop of my line. I caught a couple of small bass, nothing to write home about, but it was peaceful. I was just enjoying the solitude, you know, letting my mind drift. It must have been around 2 in the afternoon when I first heard it. The sound came from the bank to my left, maybe 30, 40 yards away, deeper in the trees. It was a rustling, a heavy kind of movement, like something big pushing its way through the undergrowth. Then I heard a splash, a real solid ker-plunk, like a decent-sized rock had been thrown into the water. My first thought, my only thought, was that it was a hog. We've got feral hogs all over this part of the state, and they get big, real big. A 200-pounder wouldn't be unusual. They're noisy, destructive, and they don't care about people. Annoying, but not exactly scary. I figured one had wandered down to the water to drink or wallow in the mud. I remember feeling a little irritated. The last thing I wanted was some hog scaring away the fish. I turned my head slowly, trying to peer through the tangle of cypress knees and hanging moss. The sunlight was coming through the canopy in patches, making it hard to see. It was all shadows and sharp, bright spots of light. The rustling stopped for a minute, and then it started again. This time it was closer. 20 yards maybe. I could hear branches snapping, not little twigs but proper sticks. This was something with weight. I put my rod down on the bank beside me, the line still in the water. I wasn't scared, not yet, just alert. My heart was beating a little faster, the way it does when you know you're not alone anymore. I stood up slowly, my knees cracking from sitting for so long. I didn't make a sound. I was just trying to get a better look. The undergrowth over there was a solid wall of green and brown, vines and ferns, and those cypress trees with their weird knobby roots sticking out of the ground like bony fingers. That's when I saw the movement. It was low to the ground at first, just a shifting of shadows. Then I saw legs. They were thick, powerful looking, and covered in what looked like dark, wet hair, mud-caked. They were bent at the knee, and they were moving, walking. But they weren't animal legs. I mean, they weren't like a deer's or a bear's. They were bipedal two legs, one after the other, moving through the trees. My brain just froze. It couldn't process it. It was like looking at something my mind didn't have a file for. It was from the thigh down, and it was walking on two legs, but it was all wrong. The proportions were off. The thighs were too thick. The way they moved was too heavy, too deliberate. It wasn't a person crouching. A person crouching doesn't have legs that look like that. They were massive, like tree trunks, and the feet, I only got a glimpse, but they were wide, splayed things. And they didn't make a human-shaped print in the soft mud I could see patches of. It was just a deep, rounded depression. And the smell hit me then. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it was overwhelming. It's hard to describe. It was a mix of things. Wet dog, but ranker. And something else underneath. Something foul, like old meat or a swampy decay. It was a physical presence, that smell, thick in the back of my throat. My breath caught. Every hair on my arms and on the back of my neck stood straight up. This wasn't a hog. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't a person. I felt a cold sweat break out all over my body, a chill that had nothing to do with the air temperature. This was a deep, primal fear, the kind that lives in your lizard brain and screams that you are prey. I didn't move a muscle. I was statue still, my eyes glued to that spot in the trees. The legs moved behind a thick cypress trunk, and for a second, they were gone. The rustling stopped. The forest went dead silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. It was like the whole bayou was holding its breath with me. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. I could feel the pulse in my temples, a frantic pounding rhythm. I was just standing there on the bank, completely exposed. I felt a desperate, stupid urge to get back on my stool, to make myself smaller, but I was paralyzed. Then I saw it again. It stepped out from behind another tree, further away now, maybe 15 yards. I still only saw it from the thigh down, but it was clearer. The hair was a dark, matted brown, almost black in the shadows. It was striding, not like a man, but with a heavy, powerful gait that seemed to sink into the earth. It was moving parallel to the bank, away from me, but the sheer size of it. I remember thinking that if it was that big from the legs up, the whole thing had to be 7, maybe 8 feet tall, minimum, and then the worst part, the part that sealed the terror for me. It stopped. The legs just stopped moving. They were planted there, partly obscured by a curtain of Spanish moss. It was standing still. It was listening or waiting. I don't know how long we stayed like that. It felt like an hour. It was probably 10 seconds. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears. I was afraid to blink. I was afraid to swallow. I was convinced that if I made any sound at all, the smallest gasp or the shift of a foot in the mud, it would turn and come for me. My mind was racing, trying to find an explanation, anything that would make this make sense. A guy in a ghillie suit? No, the legs were too thick, the movement too fluid and powerful. A bear? Bears don't walk on two legs like that for more than a step or two. This thing was striding. It was its normal way of moving. That's when the old stories bubbled up from the back of my mind. The legends, the thing people whisper about around here but never say out loud, the creature of Carter Lake. I'd always laughed it off, a campfire story for kids. But right then, standing there, smelling that god-awful stench and looking at those impossible legs, I wasn't laughing, I was believing. The figure took another step, and then it was gone. It just melted back into the deeper shadows of the cypress grove. The rustling started again, fading quickly this time, moving away from the water and up the steep, heavily wooded slope that rose from the bank. I stayed frozen for another full minute, maybe two, just listening. The normal sounds of the forest slowly trickled back in. A bird chirped somewhere, a frog croaked, but I couldn't move. My body was rigid with fear. When I finally could make my legs work, it wasn't a conscious decision. It was a panicked, jerky motion. I grabbed my rod, reeled in the line with shaking, fumbling hands, the hook and weight swinging wildly. I didn't care about the tackle box, my cooler, my stool. I just left it all there. I scrambled up the bank, slipping in the mud, my breath coming in ragged, sobbing gasps. I didn't look back. I just ran. I crashed through the woods on the path back to my truck, branches whipping at my face and arms. I didn't feel a thing. The only thing in my head was a single screaming thought. Get to the truck. Get to the truck. I burst out of the tree line into the little pull-off area. My truck was there, looking blessedly normal. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the door. I threw my rod in the passenger side, jumped in, and locked the doors. I sat there for a minute, just gripping the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. I was drenched in sweat and covered in mud. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide and wild. I started the engine and tore out of there, the truck bouncing violently over the ruts in the dirt road. I didn't slow down until I was back on the paved highway, heading towards town. It was only on that smooth, familiar asphalt that my brain started working again, and a new, cold kind of dread settled in. The logic, the geography, that slope it went up, the bank where I saw it. I know that area. I've hunted and fished all around Mercer Bayou my whole life. That particular spot on the southern tip of Carter Lake is bordered by a sheer, rocky bluff on one side and an impassable swamp on the other. The stretch of woods where I saw that thing, it's not accessible by foot, not for a human. There's no trail, there are no roads for miles. The terrain is a nightmare of thorns, swamps and deadfalls. You'd need a machete and a death wish to even try to get through it. Nobody, and I mean nobody, would be hiking back in there. It's not a place you just wander into. So what was it? A person? Impossible. An animal? Nothing I've ever seen or heard of walks like that, looks like that, smells like that. I drove home in a daze. I didn't stop for anything. I walked into my house, went straight to the bathroom and threw up. Then I just sat on the floor, my back against the bathtub, shaking. I never went back for my gear. It's probably still there, rusting away. I haven't been back to Carter Lake since. I can't even think about it without that cold fear washing over me again. I saw something that day, something that shouldn't exist. I got a glimpse of a shadowy form in the cypress canopies, a shape that sparked a fear so deep and so old, it felt like I'd tapped into something primal. I'll never forget the sight of those legs, the weight of them, the wrongness of them, and I'll never have an answer. That's the part that haunts me the most, not knowing, just having this hole in my understanding of the world, filled with nothing but the memory of that smell, that silence, and the terrifying bipedal shape of something walking where nothing could possibly be.